Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Had a Living Sacred Weapon? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Hello there. My name was Tabaru, and I was a weapon. I had been created by an elderly blacksmith who died soon after finishing me, and I had lain on the anvil where I was made for the next few years. A year after I was formed, I discovered I could manifest myself into the world. Over time I taught myself to read, speak, and think. From a journal I read, I learned that I had been forged by a spiritsmith, an artisan who imbued weapons with soul essences and runes. He had been the last spiritsmith, and I was his final creation and greatest masterpiece. A simple naginata combined with a whole soul, ashes, and a fragment of pestilence itself. As I finished the journal, I heard a thump and returned instantly to my physical form, the weapon, and waited. Inside me was a vast library that seemed to stretch on forever, with so many floors I could not see past the 12th. I watched what unfolded before me. A young boy of about 8 years old flew into the room and slammed against the wall next to me. A tall man with a pair of black wings followed him. The boy whimpered and tried to stand but failed. The winged man muttered and kicked the boy in the ribs, sending him crashing to the floor next to me. I used the impact to shift myself so I would fall beside him. Tabaru asked the boy if he wanted to live, and the boy nodded pitifully. Tabaru told him to use the weapon and assured him that it would not steal his body. Then the confused boy grabbed the haft. Tabaru immediately overrode the boy's resistance and took control of his body. Because the body was not Tabaru's own, Tabaru felt no pain. He tested the body, flexing and adjusting. The winged man watched impassively and then reappeared in front of them, throwing a punch at the body Tabaru occupied. Tabaru observed that physical blows affected the body but not the weapon, and launched an attack. The man was not fast enough to dodge. Tabaru's strike forced him to jump back to avoid a serious wound. The man retaliated, striking the boy again and trying to regain control. The boy managed to wrest the mind back from Tabaru after a brief struggle and staggered in pain. Tabaru could not retake control while the boy fought him, so he decided to examine the boy's memories in the library. He found that he could view, copy, and store a target's memories in the books inside. The boy's name was Issei. Early childhood memories showed him as a normal kid with a tomboyish childhood friend named Irina who later moved away. That loss had left him more isolated. One recent memory of Issei involved an encounter with an old man who taught him a strange phrase. Tabaru removed that memory and stored it away, finding it unnecessary. In another memory, Issei had been separated from his parents during a skiing trip and confronted the winged man, who claimed to possess a sacred gear. Wanting to help, Tabaru lightened the weight of his body, which had originally been burdened by an enormous heaviness, and Issei's clumsy swings immediately became precise and quick. Issei's sudden improvement allowed him to land a decisive strike that forced the winged man to fall back. The boy then collapsed from exhaustion, mentally and physically drained from the fight and from the shock of briefly losing control of his own body. Tabaru sat cross-legged with the naginata's tip on the ground, perfectly balanced, while the boy slowly finished materializing a few yards away and lay face down. A few minutes later the boy got to his feet and looked around in surprise before fixing his gaze on Tabaru. Issei accused Tabaru of taking his body, then realized he had just regained it. Tabaru explained that isolation can make a person feel older than they are and suggested a deal. Tabaru asked to accompany Issei. Issei was suspicious but listened as Tabaru said his parents had expected him to study hard, which explained his knowledge beyond his years. Issei blushed and scratched his cheek sheepishly when Tabaru mentioned it. Issei protested the accusation but eventually considered the offer. Later, Tabaru sat in his room reading a random book Issei had found in the school library. Issei attended Kuo Academy, a school that had only recently begun accepting male students. He had joined as a second year. What I knew was that because I had removed a particular memory he had received from an old man, he did not become a pervert. He did make friends. Two of them were the notorious Matsuda and Motohama, the only members of the perverted duo. Another was Kiba Yuto, a model student admired by many girls and envied by many boys. He sometimes gave off a feminine impression. The last friend was a girl named Kaneko, also called Kitty. Kaneko appeared. I set my book aside and watched her interact with Issei. Issei greeted Kaneko. Issei wore a pocket watch attached to his pants by a silver chain. Kaneko acknowledged him with a nod and sat beside him, eating a melon bread. The pocket watch urged Issei to eat and stop staring, and Issei looked away. Kaneko paused when she noticed the attention and glanced at him with mild confusion. As Issei began to pull out his lunch, I sensed a presence in a nearby tree and saw Kiba perched in the branches, watching with a hint of jealousy. Below him, his fans waited expectantly. As Issei and his friend ate, and Kaneko worked through several more melon breads, I watched Kiba look sullen from above while Kaneko ate her rice. Nearby, the perverted duo were being chased off by the kendo club in an exaggerated, noisy scuffle as always. When he finished, Issei said goodbye to Kaneko and left. As we departed, I watched Kaneko stare ahead and open another melon bread. She had a bag full of them. I checked my storage. The storage allowed the two of us to keep anything we wanted, up to a 50-item limit. We had found a loophole. Single containers that held many things still counted as one item. Items stored there appeared in the library, piled beside me. But to organize them because they looked messy compared to the rest of the library. Soon classes were over, and it was time to go home. Mrs. Hayadu asked Issei to head to the market to pick up something. The narrator reminded Issei not to forget to go to the market. Issei looked stunned, and the narrator had to ask if he had really forgotten. Issei ignored the question and walked down the brick road leaving the school. He took the wrong road toward the old school building and then began looking around frantically, which amused the narrator. The narrator felt someone watching and pointed out to Issei that a crimson-haired woman was watching from a window at 3 o'clock. The woman watched them from the window. The narrator told Issei to look away, and Issei complied, raising an eyebrow as he left. They headed toward the market. On the way they passed a schoolgirl who suddenly called out to Issei, asking him to go out with her. Issei turned and looked surprised as the girl fidgeted. The scene cut forward to the Hayudu residence. Issei opened the gate and asked for the keys. The narrator produced the house keys and placed them in his pocket. Issei unlocked the house, entered, and greeted Mrs. Hayu. Mr. Hayudu did not appear and was likely working late or out with colleagues. After Issei greeted his mother and handed her the groceries, he went up to his room. As soon as he sat on his bed, the narrator asked what had happened with the girl. Issei frowned and said that he had ended up getting a girlfriend. The narrator reacted loudly, and Issei grimaced, clutching his forehead and telling the narrator not to do that. The narrator asked whether Mrs. Hayudu had instructed him to shock any girl who tried to approach him. Issei explained that the narrator had the taser, so he could not do anything even if he wanted to. The narrator grumbled and then pointed out that he would have to tell his parents. Issei muttered in despair. The narrator mentally offered to laugh at his pain for support. Issei told the narrator off and buried his face in his hands. The narrator chuckled and picked up a book. Issei stood in front of a park, waiting for his date. The night before, his parents had argued loudly about it. Mrs. Hayadu had been furious while Mr. Hayadu had been supportive. Their argument had been so loud that neighbors had asked them to quiet down. Eventually Mrs. Hayadu allowed the date on the condition that they would have many grandchildren, which had startled Issei. Issei wore a black shirt with a navy fleece jacket, jeans, and black dress shoes. The narrator held him up and checked the time. While he waited, a woman in a bat-like costume handed him a leaflet bearing a magic circle and a promise that his dream would be granted. The strange leaflet made Issei hesitate, but he simply pocketed it. The girl from earlier arrived, called out his name, and apologized for interrupting. Issei reassured her that he had just arrived as well and offered a smile. The narrator watched with suspicion and sensed a disturbance, then noticed a white cat with a bell collar observing Issei. Issei and the girl walked hand in hand, showing innocent affection. The narrator commented inwardly on Issei's behavior with a mixture of bemusement and curiosity. The date went smoothly from an outside perspective. They browsed a clothing store, looked at decorations, and ate at a family restaurant. The girl, whose name the narrator learned was Amano Yuma, enjoyed a chocolate parfait while Issei watched her with a shy expression. In the afternoon they ended up at a park where only 4 people remained in the area: Issei, Yuma, the narrator, and Kaneko. Kaneko sat in a tree watching the couple intently, which made the narrator wonder whether Kaneko's behavior might be influenced by jealousy. Yuma stepped back and addressed Issei, saying that she had enjoyed the day and asking him to hear a wish she had to celebrate their first date. Issei, nervous, asked what she wanted. Yuma answered in a cold, unsettling tone, asking whether he would die for her. The narrator was taken aback by the unexpected demand. Suddenly, black wings sprouted from Yuma's back and black feathers drifted to the ground as she rose into the air. Yuma told them that the brief time spent with Issei had been fun, comparing it to playing house with a child. A buzzing sound filled the park as strange particles gathered around Yuma, coalescing into a red, spear-like form. She made a motion with her hand and launched the ethereal spear. A spear flew toward them while Issei stood frozen in shock. Nearby, Kaneko was talking with someone. The narrator moved to intercept the spear. The spear struck without effect as the narrator's form absorbed it. Aside from a few scratches on the watch glass, it remained intact. The narrator yelled for Issei to snap out of it, and the shout snapped him from his trance. Issei stared at Yuma, and Yuma stared back in disbelief. Yuma demanded how he could still be alive. Issei unfastened the watch from his belt so it was free in his hand. The narrator noticed the red-headed figure, Red Melon, hiding in the bushes beneath the tree where Kaneko crouched. The watch reported that 2 potential threats were hiding behind them and watching the fight, perhaps hoping to finish them off afterward. Issei shook his head and ordered a negative, instructing the watch to enter weapon form only on his call. The narrator acknowledged the order. Yuma summoned another spear and threw it at them again. Issei sidestepped, spun the watch to use it as a weapon, and struck the spear. As the spear dissipated, Issei redirected the watch and sent it flying toward Yuma, who was forced backward, snarling. Yuma called for the human to die and summoned 2 more spears. Issei spun the watch in front of him as the spears came in. Issei instructed Baru to act. The narrator released energy and felt the watch change. A cloud of ash swirled around Issei, blocking him from view even as the spears entered the cloud. 2 metallic clanging sounds rang out as the cloud began to clear. It revealed 2 spears embedded in the ground while Issei stood unharmed, holding a naginata in one hand. He twirled the weapon into an intimidating stance and glared at Yuma. Yuma demanded an explanation, saying they had been told Issei contained a sacred gear and questioning how this was possible. Issei asked if she knew what Baru was. Yuma snarled that she did know, about to identify it, and Issei declared that if she knew, she would have to be stopped. He shifted the naginata into position. He called Baru, and the narrator materialized above him. The narrator's form took the shape of gray smoke resembling a horned creature with many arms and multiple pale eyes. The narrator's gaze fixed on Yuma, and she flinched back. Without waiting, the narrator lunged, aiming horns and hands at her. When Yuma tried to dodge, the narrator adjusted its path effortlessly. Issei noted that as long as Baru desired it, it would not miss. Yuma unleashed spear after spear at the narrator, but the attacks passed through without effect. As the narrator closed, the smoky form shifted into an attack configuration, revealing a bident-like naginata and several smaller blades. The blades struck Yuma and sent her crashing to the ground with force. She survived the strike but was shaken and injured, struggling to move. The narrator returned to its non-attack form. Red Melon and Kaneko acted from behind. Red Melon created a red orb while Kaneko formed a protective X with her arms and launched the orb toward Issei's exposed back. The narrator warned Issei to look behind them, but the warning came a second too late. The orb struck Issei and slammed into him, knocking the breath from him. Issei gasped, staggered, and dropped to his knees, sinking the narrator briefly into the ground as he leaned on the naginata to steady himself, breathing heavily. Yuma watched in shock before someone else intervened. Under the full moon, Issei knelt wounded and pale. He whispered that he never imagined he would end up this way. A woman with long blue hair appeared, moved in without hesitation, picked Yuma up, and then vanished with her. Red Melon approached the wounded Issei and laughed, remarking that his injury made the situation interesting and claiming she would take his life for her own ends. She removed the weapon from him and laid him down. Red Melon produced 8 pawn chess pieces and placed them on Issei's chest. A magic circle identical to the one on the leaflet appeared over him, and the chess pieces floated into the circle. The narrator felt Issei's consciousness begin to fade. Storage 750. Money 20,000 yen. Co-uniform. Dragon Ball Volume 10. House keys. Mass-produced light sword. Mass-produced light gun. Magazine. Taser. Some of these unusual items could be explained. The mass-produced light sword and the mass-produced light gun had come from a zealous priest named Fried Selzen. He had called them devil worshippers before attacking, but he never managed to land a blow. They had defeated him decisively. The magazine had been kept for safekeeping after Matsuda asked them to hold onto it before he was caught by the kendo club. The taser had been given by Issei's mother as a safety device, and Issei had not yet had occasion to use it. The money was simpler. Issei wanted to save, so a friend had held onto it and only gave him the exact amount needed for lunch when necessary. The narrator reminded Issei that they only had 20,000 yen left and that he would need to find a part-time job soon. Issei hummed as he walked to his next class, picking up Matsuda and Motohama along the way. A change in the library caught the narrator's attention. 8 massive pawn pieces slowly rose from the ground, surrounding a red orb that had suddenly appeared. The narrator put down their weapon and flew over to it. As they observed, an unfamiliar presence was felt behind them. Turning, they looked through a window and saw a giant red dragon sleeping above the city. Things had just become more complicated. An alarm clock blared, a flustered voice threatening a kiss if the sleeper did not wake up, a sound the narrator still found bewildering. The narrator wondered why Issei accepted such a ridiculous item from Motohama. Perhaps Issei was still going through a phase. As Issei woke, the narrator reached into his dream and retrieved it. The dream played out with the two of them defeating Yuma, only to be struck from behind by a red orb. The narrator stored the memory inside a blank book. Memories were treated like paper in this practice. They could be folded, destroyed, or archived. As Issei rose and rubbed his eyes, the narrator snapped their fingers and warned him that he had only about half an hour to get to school. Before Issei could respond, Mrs. Hayadu called for him to wake up. Issei stretched and answered that he was up, then moved to the bathroom. The narrator smirked at Issei as he attempted to multitask, eating a piece of bread while putting on his shoes. He managed both and then ran toward the academy. Shielding his eyes from the sunlight, Issei yawned. When asked if he was all right, he waved it off and admitted he felt more tired during the day and more active at night. The narrator suggested it might have something to do with Yuma. Issei shrugged and noted it had already been 4 days since that incident. They ran in silence after that. Kuo Academy. It seemed to be controlled by a matriarchy, or at least that was the impression. The gender ratio was roughly 8 girls to every boy. Issei had enrolled on the recommendation of his middle school teacher, Mrs. Kiryu, and the narrator was relieved not to have her as a teacher again because of the awkward stares she used to give. There were more boys than girls in the first and second years, but finding a male in the third years was rare, and in the fourth year nearly impossible. Many of the boys here had come hoping to find a girlfriend, or as some jokingly called it, build a harem. The entrance test had been simple, so Issei's admission was assured. The perverted duo was a constant presence, and Issei spent a lot of time with them. Matsuda was a bald-headed student who stuck closest to Issei. He belonged to the photography club and often lingered around other students. He had once been athletic and rather famous during his younger years. Motohama wore large round glasses and was known for odd habits involving those glasses. He was also the wealthiest of the three. Issei himself had a reputation for helping others hide and deliver items, earning him the nickname Artful Dodger and, less flatteringly, Koa's Messenger. Reputation-wise, Issei was middling. His association with the student council and his nicknames made some think of him as a delinquent, and he was occasionally searched by the council without result. One morning, Motohama opened his bag and dumped a pile of books and DVDs onto Issei's desk. A nearby commotion drew attention. One girl squealed in disgust. Another complained that the two were the worst. A third told them to go away. Matsuda reacted loudly in a dramatic tone. The girls continued to insult the pair, and several of them glanced at Issei with pity. Matsuda noticed Issei's blank expression and asked why he looked so down when there were so many treasures in front of him. Motohama, poking at his glasses, agreed that Issei's mood was off and remarked that he wasn't acting like himself. Issei admitted that he did not know how to react and lacked his usual energy. The classroom door opened and the teacher entered, telling everyone to take their seats in a dull tone. Motohama and Matsuda nodded to one another, and Motohama produced some yen and asked Issei to hold the money for him and return it later. Issei took the money, and as everyone watched he moved to pick up a DVD. The narrator observed Issei quickly slipping each item into his jacket, sending them into their storage. Storage $750, plus 20, $2750. Money $20,000 plus $5,000, $25,000. Issei exhaled and folded his hands as if nothing were wrong. The narrator suppressed a laugh while arranging the remaining books and DVDs. Many classmates applauded the familiar feat as the teacher droned on. The narrator began to doze off. It was lunchtime, and we had just returned all 21 of Motohama's books, magazines, and DVDs. I sent Issei with $500 to get some lunch and looked around. Once Issei sat down to eat the sandwich he had bought, I noticed Kaneko approaching. Kaneko greeted him, addressing him as senpai. Issei nodded without speaking and continued eating. Kaneko sat down next to him, pulled out a sweet red bean bun, and took a bite that revealed the filling. Issei kept munching his sandwich. I heard a rustle above us and looked up to find Kiba in his usual spot, eating a boxed. He wore his usual gloomy expression while admirers scurried around him, trying to catch his attention and offering wrapped lunches. As the three ate, Issei suddenly stiffened, which made the others look at him curiously. I followed his gaze and felt my temper spike. A woman known as Red Melon walked by, accompanied by a black-haired woman. Red Melon glanced toward Issei and gave him a smile. He returned a nervous nod. Once they were out of sight, he slumped in relief. Kaneko tugged his sleeve and asked if he had a problem with Ria-senpai. Kiba above us also tensed at the question. Issei replied that he felt wary of Rias, as though she had done something unforgivable to him. He grimaced, and I understood why. She had overwhelmed him in a previous confrontation. Kaneko and Kiba reacted oddly to that answer. While both grew a little more cautious, they also seemed inexplicably pleased. I will never understand the creatures known as women and Kiba. It was time to head home. After saying his goodbyes to his friends, Issei began his walk. The weapon sat casually on its stand, reading a memory, the day they had met and the man with the nice fedora. Suddenly the weapon sensed someone above and closed the book. The weapon warned Issei not to react and said someone was watching from above while scanning the surroundings. Issei did not respond and kept walking. The weapon then spotted the watcher, the blue-haired woman from before. She summoned a light spear and prepared to throw it. The weapon instructed Issei to dodge on command. Issei nodded slightly as he rounded a block. The woman threw her spear. When the weapon gave the signal, Issei jumped back just in time, the spear missing him by an inch. The woman descended until she hovered a few meters above them. The weapon and Issei watched her cautiously. She had navy blue hair that covered one eye and brown eyes. The weapon, being a weapon, observed everything clearly. She wore a violet vest and a matching skirt with black shoes. The weapon cleared its focus and returned to the immediate threat. The weapon warned Issei to move left. He jumped left and the spear grazed his pants. As he landed, the woman readied another spear. The weapon told him to fall back. He obeyed. The spear missed him narrowly. Issei gulped, and the woman began to giggle. The woman laughed and remarked that it was rare to find a human or even a devil in her presence, smiling at Issei. She summoned another spear resembling a yellow double-sided sword and mocked them, suggesting Issei must be a stray with no friends or master. She raised the spear and threatened that killing him would pose no problem, then threw it. The weapon could not block from its position. Suddenly Issei's left hand glowed and he struck the spear, changing its trajectory. The woman looked surprised, then resumed her mocking expression. She muttered that he did have a sacred gear, though a simple twice critical, and reformed her spear. She moved and threw the spear again, but an explosion stopped it in her hand. They turned to see Red Melons standing on a red magic circle. Red Melons ordered the woman to keep her hands off Issei and stared at her with a steady gaze. The events and stress began to affect Issei. He grew lightheaded and slowly slumped down, landing face first and slipping into unconsciousness. The blue-haired woman snarled at Red Melons. The woman warned Red Melons not to meddle and threw her spear at her again. A magic circle flared as Kaneko appeared and struck the spear, sending it spinning away. Kaneko rose and stared blankly at the woman while Red Melons smiled. The attacker snarled and glided forward, resummoning her spear, but a bolt of lightning struck before she could reach them and knocked her back. Akino Himejima emerged from the trees, lightning dancing across her fingers. The woman asked if the crimson-haired one was from the house of Gremory. Red Melons responded with a superior stare. Red Melons introduced herself as Rias Gremory and asked the woman who she was, suggesting the woman was a fallen angel. The fallen angel chuckled as she rose to her feet and acknowledged that the boy belonged to them and that the town fell under Rias's influence. She apologized for the disturbance that day but warned Rias not to let her servant roam freely, claiming people like her might harm him while he walked. Red Melons thanked her for the advice and warned that the town was under her protection and that she would not hesitate to act if the fallen angel interfered. The fallen angel smirked, smoothed her skirt to shake off dirt, introduced herself as Calawarner, and said she hoped they would never meet again. She spread her wings and flew away. Once the fallen angel left the area, Red Melons, Kaneko, and Akino approached Issei. Red Melons examined Issei's sleeping form and summoned a magic circle beneath him. With a snap of her fingers, the four of them vanished. The next morning, I blinked at the scene in front of me. The previous night had been strange, and manipulating those memories had taken more energy than I expected. I picked up the dream Issei had slept through, opened a pen, and began writing notes into it. A few hours earlier I had discovered I could actually modify memories, though it used a massive amount of power. After using it once I had been left exhausted and sore. While I was separated from Issei, I had been exploring the mindscape, as I had started to call it, when a window that resembled an old computer interface appeared. Name: Taber. Male. Race: Spirit Weapon. Age: 18. Faction: Issei Hayadu. Description: Tabaru is a weapon of Japanese origin who prefers to remain in weapon form and is currently bonded to Issei Hai. He is technically a sacred gear. Appearance: Skills. Abilities: Says. Durability: 100-100. Mana: 100-100. Strength: 10. Defense: 10. Sharpness: 10. Storage: 650. Money: $20,500. Level: Experience: 0-100. I had to lean on the little gaming knowledge I had, since Issei never played many games. I concluded that durability was health and mana was obvious. Strength and defense were self-explanatory, and sharpness probably referred to blade quality. I decided not to overthink it. The situation unfolding in front of me was too amusing to ignore. A flashing message on the interface read a violent threat in all caps. Issei grumbled and began to awaken. Issei woke to find Rias Gremory sleeping beside him. He felt awkward and disoriented at the unexpected situation. From downstairs, Mrs. Hayadu shouted that it was already time for school. Mr. Hayadu called up to ask if Issei was still in his room and took a loud sip of coffee. Mrs. Hayadu, agitated, announced that Issei had come home late and that they would have a talk about it. She stomped up the stairs. Sunlight poured into the room and roused Rias, who blinked awake and asked if it was morning. The bedroom door swung open and Mrs. Hayadu froze in shock at the presence of a guest. She quickly recovered and told Issei to get dressed. Issei hurried, panicked, and called back that he was awake and would be up soon. Mrs. Hayadu muttered that she would not forgive him and stormed back downstairs. Down in the living room, Mr. Hayadu reacted with surprise to the news his wife relayed. Mrs. Hayadu blurted a scandalous accusation about what she believed had happened with a guest, and Mr. Hayadu nearly spat out his coffee in shock before leaping up to see what was wrong. He pleaded with his wife to calm down. I laughed at the commotion, tears of mirth welling up as the household erupted in chaos. Rias rose and began to dress calmly. Issei, embarrassed, stumbled toward her and called to her in a flustered voice, addressing her as his senior. Rias asked what was wrong. He made an awkward gesture and turned away. Rias offered a few reassuring words and finished dressing. To keep Issei from getting himself into further trouble, I quickly saved the stray mental images he projected and set them aside in a book. The rest of the morning rushed by in the usual hectic fashion as the Hayadu household prepared to leave for school. At that moment at the Kaneko residence, Kaneko stopped packing a school bag's worth of snacks and looked up. She glared at the ceiling and accused Senpai and Rias of being perverts. The snack she held crumbled to dust. At the same time beneath a tree, Kiba froze and looked up at the sky, jealousy written across his face. Kiba noted a disturbance related to Issei. Issei shivered as two ominous presences bore down on him for a brief moment. In that instant he felt as if he had died twice. Rias informed him that the incident from yesterday had not been a dream. Issei thought he had simply fainted. Rias explained that she had healed him. His condition had been critical, and his mind held multiple gaps of memory, but thanks to his tough mentality she had been able to restore him overnight by using her demonic power. She added the information matter-of-factly and smiled with a hint of pride. She then attempted to ease the awkwardness with a light, offhand remark, which left Issei looking from shocked to confused. Rias told him not to make such a strange face and reminded him that the world contained more mysteries than he could imagine. She stood, fully dressed, cleared her throat, and introduced herself as Rias Gremory and as a devil. She stated that she was his master and asked to call him a, putting a finger to her lip as she regarded him. Issei could only open and close his mouth helplessly. Before breakfast, the Hayadu family, Issei, and Rias offered a short phrase of thanks and began the meal. Despite being a weapon and not needing to eat, the narrator found it possible to enjoy the tastes of food. The narrator observed that, lacking real taste buds, most things tasted good, but they could only consume what Issei had eaten in his life. Rias complimented the meal and praised Issei's mother for her cooking. Mrs. Hayadu thanked her awkwardly, and Mr. Hayadu glanced at his wife with visible nervousness. Rias encouraged Issei to eat the meal, and he complied, still flustered. Mr. Hayadu shivered and seemed distant, drawing worried looks from everyone at the table. Mr. Hayadu asked where Rias had come from. Rias apologized for not introducing herself properly and said she was Rias Gremory, a student at the same academy as Hayadu Issei. She bowed politely. Mr. Hayadu brightened and asked whether she was from another country. Rias explained that her father's work had kept her in Japan for a long time. Mrs. Hayadu confirmed the name and then asked what sort of relationship Rias had with Issei. Rias put a finger to her chin, thought for a moment, and answered that they were simply a senior and a junior who were quite close. Mrs. Hayadu erupted and declared that was a lie. The narrator silently approved Mrs. Hayadu's outrage. Mrs. Hayadu accused them of impropriety. Rias responded that she had merely slept nearby to watch over Issei because he had been having nightmares. Mrs. Hayadu reacted with alarm at the suggestion that such closeness might be inappropriate. When the situation threatened to escalate, Rias leaned in and used a quiet display of her power to calm Mrs. Hayadu. A chill passed through the room as everyone absorbed what had happened. Issei sat in stunned awe, and both Mr. and Mrs. Hayadu looked pale and distant. Kiba brought Issei to the old school building. Rumors said it had been used long ago and then abandoned for mysterious reasons. People avoided it and called it one of the 7 wonders of Kuo. Despite its age, the building still looked sturdy aside from weathered brick and some rotting wood. Kiba announced that the club president was here as he pulled out a key and unlocked the door. He opened a surprisingly clean entrance and led them inside, locking the door behind them. He guided them up a flight of stairs and down a hallway. The narrator noted that the whole school seemed well maintained. The narrator suggested to Issei that they should claim one of the classrooms for themselves, and Issei agreed to think about it later. Kiba stopped in front of a room with a sign that read Occult Research Club and knocked. He told the club president that he had brought Issei. Club President Red Melons invited them to enter, and the narrator heard water draining nearby. The narrator warned everyone to be cautious because someone was getting ready, and Issei nodded. The narrator reflected that Issei was not as reckless as he could have been and that previous measures had helped him control his wilder impulses. They entered the room. Issei looked shocked at all the signs covering the ceiling and walls. A large circle had been drawn on the floor with several desks and sofas arranged around it. On one of the sofas sat a familiar figure, Kaneko. The narrator asked if it was Kaneko. Issei looked at her and greeted her politely. Kaneko returned the greeting with a small smile and a slight bow, then stared intently at Kiba. Issei watched them both, confused. The shower curtain in the nearby wash area was drawn back and someone explained that they had been unable to prepare earlier and had just finished getting ready. The woman then joined them in the room. The narrator bridged the moment and they all settled onto the sofas. Akino Himejima introduced herself politely and took a seat. Issei bowed and introduced himself shyly, clearly embarrassed. The narrator teased him about his obvious nervousness. Red Melons told Issei to call her Ise and invited Akino to sit beside her. Once everyone was seated, all the club members turned their attention toward Issei. Red Melons announced without delay that they were all devils. Issei stared at her in disbelief, finding the claim difficult to accept. Red Melons pointed out that he had seen a woman with black wings the night before. Issei slowly nodded at that recollection. Red Melons explained that those black-winged beings were fallen angels, former angels who had fallen and opposed the devils. The fallen angels had been enemies of the devils for ages. The narrator relayed Red Melons' explanation that the devils and fallen angels had long fought over control of the underworld, and that each side had different methods of interacting with humans to gain strength and influence. She added that angels sometimes intervene to destroy both races on higher orders, creating a three-way conflict that had lasted since ancient times. Issei protested that the story was hard for an ordinary student to accept and asked if this was really what the Occult Research Club did. Red Melons clarified that the club served as camouflage. It was a hobby and a gathering place for devils. The mood shifted when Red Melons spoke a name, Amano Yuma. The narrator felt an intense surge of hatred at the mention of that name and recalled what Red Melons had done the previous night. Melons asked Issei if he had been on a date with Amano Yuma that day. Issei responded angrily that he did not want to talk about it here. Red Melons insisted that the person existed and that Akino produced a photograph connecting that name to the fallen angels. The narrator watched as Akino showed them the photo and then put it away. Red Melons identified the girl in the photo as a fallen angel, the same kind as the one that had attacked Issei. She said the fallen angel had contacted him to accomplish a certain goal and then erased records and evidence of her presence. When Issei asked what goal, Red Melons revealed bluntly that the goal had been to kill him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Issei stared wide-eyed. Kiba placed a hand on him in a gesture of comfort, though it was unnecessary. Issei asked in shock why she had to kill him. Red Melons told him to calm down and explained that it could not be helped. He had simply been unlucky. Some possessors had not been killed, she added, shaking her head with a look of pity. Issei demanded what she meant by unlucky, still stunned. Red Melons described that day. He had gone on a date with her, then to the park, where he had been struck by a spear of light. She sipped her tea as she spoke. Issei protested that he was still alive and asked why he had been targeted. Red Melons produced an image and used it to slowly calm him. Red Melons explained that she had approached him to check whether something dangerous was inside him. She must have received a weak response, she said, and took her time to investigate until she confirmed that he was human who possessed a sacred gear. Issei, confused, asked what a sacred gear was. Red Melons answered that a sacred gear was an irregular power bestowed on certain humans. Many people recorded in history were said to have been possessors of a sacred gear, and they used their power to make their names remembered. Even now, there were people who carried sacred gears within their bodies. Many influential figures worldwide were such possessors. Most sacred gears had functions suited to human society, she continued, but some were exceptional and posed a threat to devils and fallen angels. Red Melons then told Issei to raise his hand. When he did, she instructed him to close his eyes and imagine the strongest being he could think of. Issei muttered that he imagined Son Goku from Dragon Ball. She told him to picture that figure in a pose that looked the strongest, then to lower his arms slowly and stand up. She told him to mimic the pose and to imagine it strongly without holding back. The others watched expectantly. Grimacing, Issei gathered himself and moved his hands forward as if performing a famous move. He shouted the name of the technique as he projected his arms toward the sky. Kiba and Kaneko clapped nearby, while Red Melons reacted with visible delight at the reference. Akino looked bewildered. Red Melons instructed him to open his eyes and explained that the demonic power in the place would make his sacred gear appear more easily. As Issei obeyed, his left hand began to glow. The light faded to reveal a red gauntlet with a green jewel embedded in the back. Issei cried out in shock at the appearance of the gauntlet. Red Melons told him that it was his sacred gear and that, once manifested, he could use it anywhere and anytime. She added that the fallen angel Amano Yuma had seen the sacred gear as a threat and had therefore attacked him. Red Melons explained that Issei had called for help as he lay near death and had summoned her through a paper leaflet. She then pulled out a leaflet and gestured to it. Issei, sweating, admitted that he had thrown that leaflet away into a bush. Red Melons paused and stared at him for a moment, then continued. She said the leaflets were distributed to encourage people who might summon devils, and the magic circle printed on them was safe and easy to use. One of their familiars had been disguised as a human handing them out in the business district. He had received his leaflet then, and after the attack by the fallen angel, he had called out and summoned her. Red Melons noted that usually her servants like Akino and the others would be the ones summoned. She casually tossed the leaflet behind her. Issei insisted that he had not wished for anything. Red Melons fell silent for a moment, then moved on. Red Melons explained that, as a devil, Issei had been reborn as a servant of Rias Gremory reincarnated as one of her devils. She cleared her throat as she said this. Black, bat-like wings sprouted from everyone's lower back, surprising the group. Issei reacted loudly to the unexpected sight while the others glanced at him. Kiba stepped forward. Red Melons introduced everyone in turn. She indicated the blonde-haired student and then identified herself as Kiba Yumi, a second year who was also a devil. Kaneko introduced herself as Tuju Kaneko, a first year and also a devil, nodding as she continued snacking. Himejima Akino said she was a third year and the vice president of the Occult Research Club. She mentioned her status as a devil with a soft laugh. Issei felt an instinct to keep his distance from Akino. Finally, Red Melons introduced herself as the master of the group and a devil from the House of Gremory, a house that held the rank of Duke. She smiled warmly and welcomed Issei. He still thought of her as Red Melons. After the introductions, Issei looked as if he had swallowed something bitter. Issei rode his bike down the street in a monotone as he pedaled. In the basket lay a pile of leaflets. He wondered why he had not had someone else carry them. He found the previous day's discussion interesting. Red Melons had explained the basics of devils and reincarnated devils, and how reincarnated devils had to serve the one who revived them. From his observations, everyone except Red Melons tasted and felt different. She carried a smooth, commanding presence. Reincarnated devils, on the other hand, seemed as if desire merely cloaked their bodies. That was how Issei experienced them. He thought about it as he rode on. The narrator decided, for the moment, to call her Rias. Rias explained that devils had a ranking system and that all reincarnated devils began as low rank. At first, Issei was very interested in the ranking system, but his interest dropped when Rias mentioned that she wanted to become popular. As the two students walked down the road toward the academy, every student turned to look. Issei carried Rias Gremory's bag, and whispers spread through the crowd. A girl wondered aloud why someone like him would be doing that, and her friend muttered that it was improper for someone crude to be beside Rias. Students of both CCs reacted with excited shouts and stares. Rias smiled and told him she would send someone to get him and that they would meet again later, then she separated from him. Issei wondered what she meant by later and mentally shrugged, admitting that he did not know. Before they could continue, Matsuda and Motohama appeared behind them and confronted Issei. Matsuda demanded an explanation, tears streaming down his face, reminding Issei that until yesterday they had been comrades in the unpopular alliance. Motohama fixed Issei with an intense, unreadable stare and calmly asked what had happened after they split. Issei said that he had seen paradise. The remark provoked 3 immediate reactions. Another student burst out laughing, Matsuda and Motohama went hysterical, and Kaneko and Kiba felt a sharp spike of jealousy. It was time to head home, and the group prepared to leave when Kiba reappeared and politely asked how Issei was doing. Issei greeted him, slung the bag over his shoulder, and prepared to leave the classroom. Kiba explained that he had come at Rias Gremory's request. Issei turned quickly at the news, gripping his shoulder in motion. Kiba, blushing and avoiding direct eye contact, admitted that he had indeed come by Rias's order. Issei closed his eyes, nodded, and asked what Kiba wanted him to do. Kiba, blushing deeper, murmured that he wanted Issei to walk beside him. The girls around them reacted with shrieks and dramatic declarations about the pairing, arguing over which of the two should be thought of together. Despite the commotion, Issei agreed to follow Kiba, and the two left the room together. An incident with Matsuda arose briefly but was quickly settled by the girls who now supported the idea of the pairing. In a memory, Issei protested that he did not want to become famous as Rias tried to convince him otherwise. She argued that joining would allow him certain advantages and mentioned the idea of having admirers. Issei dismissed the idea of a harem as unappealing, questioning why anyone would want that. Rias insisted that many men would desire such a situation, but Issei remained firm in his refusal. She attempted to prove her point dramatically, but he had already left before her demonstration could land. The Devil's meeting place for Rias Gremory's peerage was in the old school building. That was where they would gather after classes, during the night. They had been told that devils were more active at night so they could use their powers more effectively. Light weakened them for reasons they were still learning. Issei was slowly getting used to these rules. They were also informed about their natural enemies, the angels and the fallen angels, who could summon and use light offensively, something Issei had been subjected to in past encounters. Red Melons had left much of his understanding of his new nature to be discovered on his own, giving him tasks like distributing leaflets to certain houses. A GPS had been placed on his bike to direct him to the homes that showed strong signs of greed. In his experience, most leads seemed to point to greed. Red Melons had also explained the modern cost of summoning a devil: money, objects of value, or even one's life, with the latter often invalidating the wish if it did not match the price. Being a devil also meant that ordinary people often ignored Issei, letting him act without immediate social consequences, a fact that disappointed some members of Red Melons when he did not react as expected. He longed for the task to be finished and looked forward to resting on the wardrobe where Issei typically placed him after a long day. A few weeks had passed since Issei became a devil, and things had calmed down considerably. After splitting from the perverted duo, Issei walked to the old school building. Somehow Kiba had convinced him to call her Yumi. They had also learned that Red Melons made Kiba cross-dress as a boy. Issei entered the building and met Akino, and the two walked up the stairs together. Akino had been kind, acting like a big sister as she helped Issei adjust to his new life. They reached the club room, and Issei announced that they were coming in before sliding the door open. Akino entered first, then he followed. The room was dark, the windows covered, and scattered candles provided the only light. Red Melons acknowledged his arrival and glanced at Akino, who nodded. Red Melons instructed Issei to walk to the center of the massive magic circle, and he complied cautiously. Red Melons explained that his leaflet distribution duties were finished and that he could now perform actual devil work, noting that handing out leaflets was reserved for beginning devils and familiars. Issei asked whether that meant he could now make contracts, and Red Melons confirmed. Since it was his first time, she told him he would take a contract for someone with a small wish, one of 2 reserved contracts for Kaneko, and she asked him to choose one. Kaneko stepped forward and bowed, requesting his help. Issei scratched the back of his head and nodded. Issei noticed Kiba inch toward his bag and slip his P uniform out before sneaking away. Before he could react, the magic circle began to glow bluish-white, and Akino started carving something near its edge. Red Melons asked Issei to place his left hand on her stomach. He did. She drew a symbol on his hand and then traced a circle before stepping back. Red Melons explained that the mark would allow him to instantly transport to his client and, after the contract was completed, return to the circle. Issei examined the slowly fading symbol. He found himself warming to Red Melons and the group. He did not yet respect or fully trust her, but he was beginning to feel fond of them. He resolved not to reveal himself as the killer and decided to see how the plan would play out. Red Melons asked Akino if she was ready, and Akino nodded and stepped back. The magic circle began to hum and flashed brightly, blinding everyone for a moment. When the light faded, Red Melons explained that his demonic reserves were lower than those of a devil child. Issei realized the strange red energy he had consumed earlier explained his low reserves. It had tasted bitter and sweet. Because he could not appear through the circle, Issei had to bicycle to the client's house. It took him about half an hour to reach the address. After hesitating, he knocked. A thin man wearing glasses opened the door and demanded to know who he was. Issei put on a cheerful expression and explained that he was a new devil summoned by the man. The man flared that devils did not knock on doors, that they appeared from the leaflets, and that the devil he had called for was Kaneko. Issei felt awkward and apologized, explaining that he lacked the demonic power to appear from the magic circle. The man accused him of being a pervert. Issei denied it and argued that if he had the power he would have appeared through the circle. He would not have been cycling through town at night otherwise. The man called him a super pervert, and Issei finally lost his temper, angrily insisting that he was a devil. The man opened the door fully and, seeing Issei's expression soften, asked whether Issei was crying. Issei touched his cheek in surprise and found it wet. The man offered sympathy, saying that Issei must have been shocked to discover he could not teleport through the magic circle, and Issei confirmed that was the case. I blinked as the man led us into his house. In one room was an otaku shrine. A large bookshelf held 50 volumes of Dragon Ball, a glass case displayed dozens of limited edition figurines, and the walls were plastered with posters of various anime characters, including one wall devoted to a single massive poster. The man, Mr. Morisawa, sat in the middle of the room. He had been kind to let us in after seeing Issei's sorry state. The night had been strange. Mr. Morisawa had wanted Kaneko to dress as a character from an anime, and when the client challenged someone to perform a famous attack from Dragon Ball, Issei obliged. The challenge and the shared enthusiasm led the two men to bond over Dragon Ball. There were many cheer-like cries of that attack that night. In the end, however, Issei could not form a contract with Mr. Morisawa because many of the wishes the man wanted granted would have put him at fatal risk. All in all, it had been a very strange night and day. Kiba had stolen Issei's P uniform, and Tabaru decided to watch the reaction the next morning rather than remind him. Issei had also acquired a red gauntlet on his left arm. Sitting on top of his weapon form, Tabaru gazed at the board before him. The interface resembled a role-playing game status screen and listed his particulars. The board identified him as Tabaru, male, an 18-year-old spirit weapon aligned with Issei Hayu. It described him as a weapon of Japanese origin that preferred to remain in weapon form and was technically a sacred gear. Additional entries noted appearance, skills, and abilities. The stat readout showed durability 100-100, mana 100-100, strength 10, defense 10, sharpness 10, storage 650, money $20,500, level 2, experience 0-100, and points. The only adjustable stats available were strength, defense, and sharpness, and their purposes were obvious. Tabaru allocated 2 points each to strength and sharpness and spent the last point on defense. After the allocation, the board updated. Durability rose to 110-110, mana to 120-120, strength to 12, defense to 11, sharpness to 12, storage remained 650, money updated to $25,000, points dropped to 0, and experience showed progress. Tabaru felt the change. The pole of his body thickened slightly, and the blade lengthened and widened by an inch. He felt noticeably stronger. Issei muttered that he had felt a chill as he walked to the old school building. They entered and went to the club room, where, oddly, they were the only ones at that moment. Tabaru demanded to be summoned, proud of his recent upgrade and eager to be seen. Issei blinked but complied. He picked Tabaru up and began spinning him by the chain. At that moment the rest of the club arrived, but Issei kept his focus on the summoning. Issei invoked the command to summon Tabaru. The chain extended and stiffened as the weapon formed and sharpened. Moments later Issei held Tabaru in weapon form, gripping the pole with one arm. He performed a sequence of maneuvers, spinning the weapon around and demonstrating every trick he knew. After a final flourish he planted the pole on the floor, the blade pointing toward the ceiling. A round of applause came from behind Issei. The entire club clapped, making him visibly embarrassed and blush. After the applause, Red Melons cleared her throat, placed a hand on her hip, and produced a piece of paper. At that cue Tabaru reverted to his previous form, and Issei tensed. Mr. Morisawa had been willing to form a contract with Issei should he be summoned again. After several lectures on matters related to Devil's details Tabaru ignored because he could later review them in Issei's memories they discussed other topics. Now that Tabaru understood why Issei had limited demonic energy, he stopped drawing on the red stream and allowed that energy to dissipate throughout the room. Despite the adjustment, Issei still lacked enough demonic energy to use a teleportation spell, so he biked to Kaniko's other reserved contract. The contract led him to a mansion about half an hour away from the academy. After parking his bike, he knocked on the door. The sound of a lock turning announced that the door was open, and a voice called for them to enter. Issei opened the door, and their fate shifted instantly. Standing inside was a massive, muscular man wearing a magical girl outfit. Tabaru reacted with an involuntary sound and lost consciousness within Issei's mind. Issei panicked at Tabaru's sudden lapse and called out mentally, but Tabaru had already fainted in his mind. I woke up to find Issei curled in a corner, hunched like a wounded animal. Kiba was rubbing his back in consolation while the others watched with concern. He remained in that position until the next day. I asked that I would probably regret asking and inquired what had happened, but a flash of memory came back so sharply that I fainted again. I came to an hour later. Rias had a conflicted look as she held a sheet of paper up to an extremely fatigued Issei, who sat slouched on a couch. I climbed back to my perch and reviewed his memories to catch up. Kiba had joked that Issei must have an ability that attracted people. After a tedious lecture, Issei was excused from classes for the day but still had to attend devil meetings. As Issei walked down the road, a faint squeak drew his attention and he found a nun on the ground. He thought it was a clumsy fall and hesitantly offered a hand. The girl, who seemed about their age, apologized and thanked him. A breeze lifted her veil and revealed her face. Issei flushed and stared in awe, the expression of someone struck by unexpected affection. They began interacting, talking, sharing a meal, and walking together. They behaved like a pair who enjoyed each other's company. They ended up at a local abandoned church, since Issei was a devil he could not enter. He reluctantly said he had to leave, and the girl called after him, offering to make tea as thanks for helping her. Issei hesitated, then introduced himself as Hayate Issei and said people called him Issei. The girl brightened and introduced herself as Asia Argento. They agreed to meet again, and Asia bowed and promised she would come. I asked if he seemed happy, and he sighed contentedly. That night, Ria scolded Issei. She warned that devils should avoid churches because they were considered enemy territory and that being seen there could draw the attention of exorcists. She explained that, although the nun did not harm him because his act had been one of kindness, angels and exorcists were always on the lookout and could strike with lethal force if provoked. She emphasized that exorcists were dangerous because their powers were supported by prayer, and that an exorcist with a sacred gear could be especially lethal. I thought I could absorb many attacks, but I understood why she was so worried. Issei acknowledged her warning. Rias let out a sigh and crossed her arms. She then explained that a human might avoid death by being resurrected as a devil, but devils who were exorcised were completely erased, returning to nothing. She warned him about how serious that consequence was and then softened her tone, asking him to be careful. Issei agreed. Akino appeared behind him with a playful remark about the lecture, but then her expression turned serious. She informed them that they had received an order for a hunt from the Archduke. So apparently there were reincarnated devils who sometimes went rogue, betraying or even killing their devil masters. Devils were more powerful than humans, and many strays used that power for their own selfish purposes. That was why the fallen angel Kalawarner had called Issei a stray. Stray devils were like stray dogs' trouble. Members of the three races would try to eliminate them whenever one was found. The one they were hunting was a stray devil named Visser, a former servant of some devil. The stray had been located in a warehouse on the town's outskirts and was rumored to lure humans inside each night to feed. The idea of a devil feeding on a human was oddly chilling. Tall grasses surrounded them as they approached the building at midnight. Being a weapon had perks, including perfect night vision. Kaneko suddenly complained about the smell of blood and pulled her uniform up to cover her nose. I wondered what she meant by smell. Issei chuckled mentally and explained that smell was one of the 6 senses. I was surprised 6, not 5. Issei teased me when I enumerated sight, taste, touch, smell, and hearing. A sense of danger thickened as they drew closer to the warehouse. The presence of killer intent made Issei's legs tremble. I sent him a calming memory of happiness and it steadied him. Red Melons encouraged Issei that it was a good opportunity to see what a fight was like, speaking in the calm, reliable tone of a senior. Issei protested that he would be of little use since they had never fought in something like this before. Red Melon spoke plainly that while it was still dangerous, Issei could at least watch how devils fought and learn the traits servants had. She moved forward and the others followed. Red Melons explained that devils who were masters conferred traits to those who would become their servants. She began a brief history lesson. Long ago, there had been a 3-sided war among the devils, the fallen angels, and God with its angels. All sides had huge armies and fought for what felt like an eternity. In the end, each lost most of their forces and the war ended several hundred years ago with no clear victor. The devils were not exempt from massive losses. High-ranking devils with peerage who had commanded dozens of troops lost so many underlings that they could no longer field armies. Kiba added from behind Issei that most of the pure devils had died in the war. Even after the conflict ended, tensions remained among the devils, fallen angels, and God. None of them could let their guard down. Because of those losses, the devils created a system to form small, powerful groups called the Evil Peace. Red Melons explained that devils with peerage borrowed the structure of the human game chess for their servant devils. It was also a sarcastic nod to the fact that many servants were devils reincarnated from humans. From this came the roles of king, queen, knight, rook, bishop, and pawn. Since they could not raise large armies, they formed small teams of servants and gave them enormous powers. This system had been in place for a few hundred years and had grown popular among the peerage. Issei asked if the chess rules had really become popular. Red Melons confirmed that high-ranking devils began competing by boasting whose piece was stronger, and eventually started holding matches where they used their servants, a contest called the rating game. The strength of a devil's pieces and their performance in rating games affected social standing and peerage. Recently, there had been a trend called Piece Collect, where talented humans were gathered and turned into pieces. Talented servants could raise their master status. Red Melons noted that she herself was not yet a mature devil and could not participate in official tournaments. Even if she could, there were conditions she had to meet first. In short, Issei and her other servants would not be competing for a while. Kiba confirmed that she and the others had not played in those games yet. The atmosphere grew lighter when the group began to bicker over small things. I reminded Issei that Yumi had taken his P uniform. He blinked and turned to Yumi, who smiled faintly, trying to look innocent. He asked for his uniform back and everyone watched curiously as Issei leaned in close in a teasing, awkward manner. Yumi became visibly flustered and fainted from the embarrassment. I mentally announced his victory with a dry sense of amusement. Issei caught Yumi and supported her on his shoulder while Akino smiled and Kaneko looked away with twitching eyes. Issei then asked Red Melons about his role and traits and what piece he would be. A brief, quiet moment passed as they gathered themselves for the confrontation ahead. Issei adjusted his stance with Kiba as she began to slip. Red Melons warned Issei, but she was cut off as the killing intent in the air intensified. The stray devil taunted that she could smell something disgusting and also something delicious, asking whether it was sweet or sour. Red Melons declared that they had been tasked with eliminating the stray devil. A strange laugh answered, and a giant black shadow unfolded into a woman whose lower body was a grotesque creature. The blue gem glinted in her torso and a snake formed her tail. Red Melons accused the stray devil of leaving her master's side and rampaging, invoking Duke Gremory and declaring the stray devil's elimination. The stray devil retorted with a ferocious threat and raised a clawed hand to strike. Red Melons called Yumi forward. Red Melons explained that Yumi held the knight position and therefore had extraordinary speed. Yumi became a blur as her speed increased. Red Melons added that Yumi's ultimate weapon was a sword. A broadsword materialized in Yumi's hand, a fragile shell meant to break if overwhelmed. Yumi leaped into the air and vanished in the moonlight, reappearing a split second later as the stray devil cried out in pain, her left arm struck. A shadow then revealed Kaneko at the stray devil's feet. Red Melons introduced Kaneko as the Rook, explaining that the trait of a Rook was absolute strength and strong defense. It was impossible for a devil of lesser caliber to crush Kaneko. Dust settled to reveal Kaneko unharmed as she held the stray devil's foot with ease, pushed off, and launched into the air to punch the stray devil in the stomach. The stray devil flipped backward and fell onto her back. Red Melons called for Akino. The club president noted that Akino was a queen, the strongest after Red Melons herself and the unbeatable vice president, combining traits of pawn, knight, bishop, and rook. Akino smiled and stepped forward. She raised a hand, and lightning answered the summons. A flash struck the stray devil in the gut and shocked her violently. Akino continued to direct thunder at the stray devil, whose cries faded as she was repeatedly struck. Red Melons observed that Akino was kind to allies but relentless in battle and excelled at attacks using demonic powers and natural elements like thunder, ice, and fire. As Akino focused her assault, the snake head on the stray devil's tail lunged toward Red Melons. Issei moved without hesitation, swinging forward to intercept. He asked the weapon beside him to take care of the threat and to be consumed. The weapon, already formed as a naginata, shimmered and responded that it could be consumed. Issei agreed, and the weapon gleamed as its form began to change. When the snake bit the naginata, it recoiled in pain as its fangs disintegrated into ash. The tail head writhed and finally turned to ashes. Red Melons commented that Akino normally showed kindness to her comrades and would not be a problem for Issei. She teased that Akino had found Issei endearing and would be gentle with him. As Issei moved, he absorbed the ashes left behind. Issei did it because the ashes were useful. As he absorbed them, a notification informed him that he had unlocked a trait and a stat. The notification explained that as an Ash Duke he had great control over ashes and could consume them to regain power or manipulate them for various abilities. It also recorded the amount of ashes he had accumulated, which could be used for many ash-related abilities. I was overflowing with ashes. I watched Red Melons stand before the dying stray. Only her head and chest remained intact. The rest had already turned to ash, buried in the rubble. I methodically collected the ashes, sealing them into boxes until I had 5 crates. As I worked, Red Melons asked if there were any last words, and Visser looked at her pleadingly. Visser begged to be killed, unable to bear the pain. Red Melons obliged, forming a red orb that she sent forward. To the others it appeared as a fatal strike, but to Issei and me the stray disintegrated into ash at the last moment. After a pause, Red Melons sighed and addressed the group, declaring the mission over and commending everyone for a job well done. Issei then asked the leader what role he occupied. Red Melons dismissed his concern and told him he was a pawn. Issei felt deflated, thinking he was the lowest piece. I reassured him that being a pawn had an advantage. While others had the power of a single chess piece, he effectively had 8. Slow understanding spread across his face. and his gloom eased into a small, relieved smile. We left the building together. They counted their spoils quietly, 50,000 yen, a mana crystal, and valuable experience. I felt myself grow stronger and new potential opening within me. I had learned a new ability, Summon Visser, which allowed me to call forth an ash-formed duplicate of the stray devil Visser at the cost of a substantial amount of ashes. Sometime later, as Issei pedaled toward a client's house, I wondered why he volunteered for these tasks. His demonic energy was increasing on its own, but it was still not enough to activate the magic circle. I found the ashes fascinating and had grown increasingly intent on gathering them, though I kept that mostly to myself. We had originally planned to head home, but Red Melons received a notification about a summoning leaflet activating nearby. As the group's fledgling, Issei was the one chosen to investigate, so we set off toward a stranger's house. Outside the library, a red dragon I had seen before had awakened and altered the scenery into a field under a night sky. He was obsessed with confronting a foe he called the White One, but otherwise he was composed. Issei was not ready to interact with the dragon, so I stayed silent on his behalf. When we reached the client's house, the unlocked door gave way without resistance. A heavy chill and sense of danger filled the air. Issei thought that something smelled like death, and I advised caution. We crept forward and peered around a corner. A man was suspended upside down on the wall, grievously wounded and barely conscious. A white-haired man in clerical clothing entered the room, took in the scene, and then drew a firearm. Without hesitation, he fired into the wounded man several times, killing him. The noise gave away our presence. A floorboard creaked and the priest turned, recognizing us at once. He grinned with an unsettling intensity. The priest announced himself as Fried Selzen and began to taunt us in a sing-song tone, describing himself as a boy priest who cut down devil-like people. He declared that he belonged to an exorcism organization and explained that he had killed the man because the man had been summoning devils. Fried made his contempt clear, insisting that humans who relied on devils were no longer truly human and that he made a living by eliminating devils and those contracted to them. Issei protested, asking how a human could kill another human when they were supposedly meant to only kill devils. Fried mocked him, laughing at the idea that a devil would lecture him, and went on to assert that devils were despicable and that some things were common sense. He suggested, harshly, that Issei's life needed to be restarted from scratch, dismissing Issei as a reincarnated devil beyond help. Fried laughed loudly and proclaimed that he had to kill them, waving a beam sword in the air. The narrator observed that Issei compared the weapon to a beam saber from Gundam. Fried froze when he recognized Issei and accused him of being the boy he thought he had shot at the park months ago. The narrator's memory confirmed it. White hair, a wild expression, this was the same man. Fried moved with sudden speed like a ninja, and Issei hastily backed away. A silent, glowing projectile struck Issei's left calf, forcing him to stumble and cry out. He tried to retreat, but another shot hit his right calf and he fell, struggling to rise. Fried boasted about using a special silent bullet made for exorcists, calling it a bullet of light, and then aimed his gun at Issei's head. The narrator braced to intervene. Asia arrived and begged for the violence to stop. She reacted in horror at the sight of a lifeless body displayed nearby as a warning and could barely speak. The narrator noted Asia's panic when she realized who Issei was. Fried derided her and insisted the figure was a devil, mocking the notion that a human and a devil could have any connection. He announced that devils and humans, especially those tied to the church, could never coexist and claimed his group were heretics abandoned by God who only survived with the support of fallen angels. Fried said he had to kill Issei to complete his purpose and raised his sword as if to stab. The narrator prepared for retaliation, but Asia suddenly stepped in front of Issei and pleaded for mercy, asking Fried to spare him. Fried grew furious at her defiance and struck her, shoving her aggressively. Issei crawled toward her, alarmed by the bruise forming on her cheek. Fried continued to taunt them, promising a brutal fate for Issei, then spun his sword and leaped into the air as a blue magic circle flared beneath him. The narrator watched the scene intensify. Reinforcements arrived at that moment. Kiba appeared and announced that they had come to rescue Issei, holding a long sword with several more strapped to her back. Kino stepped forward with a composed displeasure at the situation. Kaneko readied herself, putting on a pair of paw-like gloves. Fried shouted that he would present his attack to the devils and rushed forward, swinging his sword wildly. Kiba met the attack and defended with precise, energetic strikes, declaring that Issei was one of them and that she would not allow him to be harmed. Fried mocked them crudely, prompting Kiba to respond with a renewed, focused assault. The fight unfolded non-graphically in fast, anime-style action. Swords clashed, magic flared, and the combatants moved with speed and determination. The narrator moved to help Issei, offering a limited healing attempt to remove burned skin so his body could begin to recover. Issei responded with a grunt as the narrator began to work while the battle continued around them. Red Melons asked when Issei had arrived, then apologized, admitting she had not expected a stray exorcist to show up at the client's house as she examined his wounds. She asked if he had been hurt. Issei nodded meekly, and as his adrenaline faded he gasped that he had been shot. Red Melons turned her glare toward Fried and sarcastically accused him of looking after her servant. Fried laughed and admitted he had been toying with Issei, boasting that he had meant to launch a vicious attack but had been interrupted and it had ended up as a dream. He laughed as the furniture around him was blasted apart and a red orb appeared in his palm, the same red orb that had affected them earlier. Red Melons declared she would never forgive anyone who harmed her servants, especially someone who damaged her personal possessions. Issei bristled inwardly at being treated like property. Akino warned Red Melons that several fallen angels were heading toward the house and that they would be at a disadvantage if they stayed. Red Melons ordered that they would return to headquarters once they retrieved Issei and told Akino to prepare for teleportation. Issei pleaded that they must take Asia too, watching Asia slowly get to her feet. Red Melons explained that only devils could use the magic circle to transport and that the circle could only teleport her and her servants. Issei and Asia met each other's eyes. The magic circle beneath them began to glow. Issei shouted Asia's name. She smiled with quiet contentment and told him they would meet again just before a flash of light appeared. Tabor was a spirit weapon of Japanese origin, technically a sacred gear, bound to Issei height. He preferred to remain in his weapon form and stayed close to Issei. He kept his appearance, skills, and memories of their bond to himself. Issei insisted to the student council president that he needed to save Asia. The president, Red Melons, explained that rescuing her would be dangerous. Asia served the fallen angels, and aiding her would make the fallen angels into enemies, forcing them all into conflict. Issei stared speechless at the refusal, and his mood sank into quiet despondency. He left school and sat on a park bench, skipping classes because sorrow and unhealed injuries made concentration impossible. He had not eaten breakfast, having walked away with a heavy heart. Asia approached and looked at him curiously. Issei was surprised to see her and called her name. She returned his greeting softly. They stood before the register at a nearby W.C. Donald's while Asia hesitated over the choices. Murayama, an employee and a fellow Kuo student, looked unsure as the lunch rush continued. Issei had taken Asia there so she could eat in a familiar, casual atmosphere. He had offered help earlier and Asia had gently refused, saying she would manage. Murayama watched Asia with a shy expression. He had been friendly to Issei in the past. Issei told Murayama that Asia would have the same order as him. Murayama blushed and nodded while Asia fretted quietly about buying a hamburger for herself. Issei suggested that she get used to Japanese food customs, and she agreed. When their meals arrived, they sat at an empty table. Tabaru, appearing briefly in a visible form, produced the same meal for himself as the two of them. Issei showed Asia how to unwrap the burger and demonstrated how to eat the fries. Asia was amazed at the simple techniques, and Issei laughed silently at her delight. She ate slowly at first, then began to enjoy the food. Tabor took a bite as well. Asia declared the burger delicious and explained that she had never eaten one before. She had only seen them on television. Her usual diet consisted of simple bread, soup, vegetables, and pasta. Issei encouraged her to savor the taste so she would remember it. Asia promised to eat with joy and sipped her soda delicately. After they finished and left W.C. Donald's, Issei suddenly suggested they go have some fun, and Asia agreed. He led her toward a nearby arcade. They played a few games, and when they briefly lost sight of Asia, they found her in front of a crane machine, staring at a plush doll of a popular anime mascot named Rake. She blushed and pretended there was nothing, but Issei asked if she liked the doll. She admitted shyly that she did. Issei inserted coins and tried to win the prize. Tabaru, assisting discreetly, advised him when to move the crane. Issei followed the guidance and successfully snagged the Rake plush. He celebrated with a small victory pose that made Asia giggle. He gave the doll to Asia, who hugged it to her chest and thanked him, promising to take care of it. She explained that the doll would represent the wonderful day she met him and that she would treasure it as a memory. Issei blushed and looked away, scratching his cheek. Issei suggested they spend the whole day playing at the arcade and took Asia's hand to lead her deeper into the games. She accepted eagerly, and they continued their afternoon together, sharing simple joy and the quiet warmth of a new friendship. Issei sighed that they had played a lot today as the two walked. Down the street, they had actually played until dusk. Asia replied that she was a bit tired and sighed happily. Issei winced and gripped the leg wound from yesterday. All of his other injuries had healed, but that one remained, and Red Melons had told him to take a break from school and from devil activities for a few days. Asia asked with concern whether the injury was from yesterday. She knelt and asked to see the wound. Issei agreed and lifted his trouser, revealing the bullet mark left by Fried. Asia placed her palms over the mark and a warm, gentle green light covered his leg. After a few seconds she stopped and looked up to ask how he felt. Issei smiled and tested his foot, saying that he no longer felt uncomfortable and that the pain was gone. He ran around briefly and then turned to thank Asia, marveling at her healing power and asking if it was a sacred gear. Asia confirmed that it was. Issei admitted that he also had a sacred gear, though he did not know its effect yet. Asia looked shocked to hear that. She began to cry and sat down on a bench, then told the story of a young girl called the Holy Maiden. The girl had been abandoned by her parents in a region of Europe and was found and raised in a nearby church by a nun, alongside many other orphans. She became a devout believer and, at the age of 8, discovered a power that allowed her to heal. She used it first to heal a wounded puppy, an act witnessed by a member of the Catholic Church. Her life changed after that. Sent to the main church, she became known as the Holy Maiden because of her gift. She healed many believers and people were told her power was divine protection. Rumors spread, and she was respected as a holy figure even without her own approval. Despite the kindness she received, the girl felt lonely because no one truly became her friend. People seemed to revere her power more than see her as a person. One day she healed a wounded devil after finding it injured. She could not ignore its suffering and, out of kindness, healed it. Church members who witnessed this reported the incident, and the ministers were shocked. They declared that a power that could heal devils could not be acceptable and labeled it witchcraft. The girl who had been respected as the Holy Maiden was suddenly feared and called a witch. The church abandoned her. With nowhere else to go, she was taken in by an organization called the Stray Exorcists, and she had to accept protection from those she had once feared. She continued to pray and to thank God despite feeling abandoned. What hurt her most was that no one from the church defended her. There was no one who cared for her as a person. She blamed herself, thinking she had not prayed enough and berating her own clumsiness. She cried and called it a trial given by the Lord that she must endure, trying to dry her tears. She said that she still believed she would make friends one day and shared a simple dream of buying flowers and books with a friend. And having someone she could talk with. Tears returned as she trailed off. Issei listened in stunned silence, moved by her story. He gripped her hands, looked into her tearful eyes, and resolved to act. Issei declared that he would become her friend and that, in fact, they already were friends. He reassured her that although he was a devil, he would not take her life or demand any price, and that she could call him whenever she wanted. He fumbled through his pocket and offered his mobile number. Asia asked why he was doing this. Issei laughed awkwardly and insisted that it was not about why they had played, talked, and laughed together all day, so they were friends regardless of being human, devil, or believer. Asia asked uncertainly if this was a pact with a devil, and Issei shook his head, saying it was not. They would become actual friends and put other things aside. Issei told her that they would talk and play when they wanted and that he would go shopping with her for books or flowers, asking hopefully if that was all right. Asia covered her mouth and began to cry again, this time with hope. Asia whispered that she had no common sense. Issei suggested they could learn by exploring the city, smiling at her. Asia muttered that she could not speak Japanese and did not know the culture. Issei promised to teach her, even to make her learn a proverb, and suggested visiting museums to see samurai, sushi, and geisha. Asia admitted she did not know what to talk about with a friend, looking at him hopefully. Issei said they had already talked like friends for a whole day and grinned. Asia asked if he would become her friend. Issei's grin shifted into a genuine smile, and he said they should get along from now on. The clouds parted and of sunlight warmed them, and Asia smiled, relieved to have a friend. Suddenly a voice declared it impossible, shattering the moment. Issei and Asia both stammered at the sight of the fallen angel, who laughed at their trembling voices. Issei demanded to know what a fallen angel wanted, and the fallen angel sneered that she did not want a filthy low-class devil speaking to her. She declared that Asia was their property and demanded that Asia return, turning to the girl, who backed away. Asia refused. She said she did not want to return to the church or to the people who killed others, and accused them of having harmed her. She hid behind Issei, who stood protectively. The fallen angel urged Asia not to say such things, insisting that Asia's sacred gear was essential to their plan and demanding that she come back. She called Asia troublesome in a sneer. Issei stepped forward and asked what the fallen angel intended to do with Asia if she took her back. The fallen angel spat that he should not use her name because it would be defiled, dismissed his concern, and warned that if he did not return to his master's place he would die. She then formed a yellow light spear that resembled a golden double-sided lance. Called to his sacred gear and lifted his arm. He had awakened the sacred gear earlier. It was a red gauntlet set with a green jewel and 2 golden spikes. The fallen angel laughed, saying the higher-ups had been wrong to call his sacred gear dangerous and explaining that it was a common one called twice critical, which temporarily doubled the wielder's power but posed no real threat to her. She insulted him as a low-class devil. Issei clicked his tongue, looked around, and then commanded his sacred gear to activate, believing it could double his power. The green jewel glowed and the sacred gear responded, signifying that his power had been boosted. Issei felt his strength surge and the red dragon drake grinned at the change. He braced for battle, but the golden lance struck him in the torso, knocking the wind from him and sending him stumbling to the ground. Calawarner mocked him, saying that even with doubled power he could not evade her spear and that the gap between them remained. She retracted the lance, and Issei dropped forward, gasping for air. Asia immediately used her ability to heal him. After a brief moment of concentrated effort, Issei recovered. The injury faded as Asia's power took effect. The fallen angel warned Asia that if she did not come willingly she would have to kill the devil who stood beside her, emphasizing that Asia's sacred gear, Twilight Healing, was rare and essential to their plan. Issei attempted to protest that he could defeat her, but Asia appeared not to hear. Defeated, she said that she understood. Issei cried out her name. Asia thanked him for the day, said she had enjoyed herself, and smiled as she walked toward the fallen angel. The fallen angel praised her, saying the problem was resolved and promising that after the ritual Asia would be freed from her suffering, smiling cruelly. Issei reached out and reminded Asia that they were friends. Asia affirmed that they were friends and thanked him for befriending her, then offered a final smile and bade him goodbye as black wings enveloped her. The fallen angel sneered that Issei had been spared because of Asia and warned that she would kill him if he interfered again, then flew away and vanished into the sky. Issei slowly rose and stared into the air, despondent. He sank to his knees and struck the ground with his armored fist, shouting Asia's name and cursing into the sky. No one could help him at that moment. Someone named Red Melons slapped Issei's cheek hard. Red Melons said angrily that no meant no and that she could not allow him to go rescue that sister. She glared at him. Issei's bangs hid his expression, But he was determined. After Calawarner had taken Asia, he had reported the incident to Red Melons and begged to be allowed to rescue her. Red Melons did not take it well. Issei insisted that he would go alone, worried about the ritual the fallen angels were performing and about Asia's safety. Red Melons retorted by asking if he was really that stupid. Rias warned that he would definitely be killed if he went and that he would not be able to come back to life. She spoke as if he were being dim-witted. Issei felt she thought he was simply being stubborn. Rias continued, reminding him that his actions would affect not only her but also the other members, and that as a devil of the Gremry group he needed to be aware of that. Issei remained stubborn. Issei proposed leaving the group and going on his own, believing it to be his best option. Rias grew enraged and insisted that she could not allow it. Issei declared that he had become friends with Asia Argento and would not abandon her, stating his conviction. The others reacted with brief admiration before Rias dismissed it. Rias explained that Asia had originated from God's side and that a fallen angel and a devil could never truly coexist. She warned that showing any weakness would invite attack from their enemies. Issei countered that Asia was not their enemy, and the conversation became tense. Rias maintained that even if Asia herself was not an enemy, her origins meant she had no place with the devils, and she urged Issei to forget about Asia. Issei glared and refused to relent. Before the argument escalated, Aquino approached Rias and whispered in her ear. Rias calmed considerably, then addressed Issei and the other members. She announced that she had an urgent matter to attend to and that she and Aquino would be leaving briefly. Issei panicked and tried to protest, but Rias placed a finger on his lips and spoke to him directly. Rias told Issei that he misunderstood the nature of a pawn. She explained that a pawn possessed a special ability called promotion. She compared it to chess, saying that a pawn could change into other pieces if it reached the opponent's base, and that when Issei stepped into a location she acknowledged as the enemy's base he could change into any piece except the king. Issei's anger faded as he considered the possibilities. Rias noted that because Issei had been a devil for only a short time there were restrictions, and he might not yet be able to promote to the ultimate piece, a queen. However, she said that he could change into other classes if he desired promotion strongly in his heart. As she explained, the magic circle around her grew brighter. She added that sacred gear responded to desire. The stronger the desire, the stronger the sacred gear would be. She finished by reminding him that even a pawn could take down a king, a basic truth of chess that also applied to the devil's pieces, and then she disappeared with Aquino. Aquino asked if they were ready, and Issei affirmed that they were. Yumi asked if Issei was truly going, and Issei confirmed that he had to go because Asia was his friend and he had to save her. Yumi warned him that he would likely be killed and that even with promotion and his sacred gear, he could not take on a group of exorcists and fallen angels alone. Issei nevertheless insisted that he would go and that even if he died he would free Asia. Yumi admired his determination but called it reckless as she summoned a sword. When Issei asked what she intended to do, Yumi revealed that she would accompany him. She admitted she did not know much about Asia but considered Issei a comrade and respected his decision. She also confessed a personal dislike for fallen angels and priests. Issei was moved by the word comrade. Yumi reasoned that Rias's earlier words about the enemy's base implicitly acknowledged the church as that location and that Rias had indirectly approved Issei's mission. She suggested Rias expected them to support him rather than lock him away. Yumi then summoned more swords and strapped them to her back. Kaneko walked forward and quietly stated that she would go as well, explaining that she felt uneasy about only Issei and Yumi going. Issei was deeply touched and cried tears of gratitude. Kaneko responded with a small, private gesture toward Yumi. Yumi offered a dejected smile but also agreed to join. Issei resolved that the three of them would carry out the rescue mission together and raised his fist to the air, determined to save Asia. They examined the church from a distance. Issei asked Burr to scout the area. He whispered the request, drawing the others' attention. Baru nodded, shifted, and materialized next to the group to take up a scouting position. After a few moments, a gray bird replaced him. Changing into unfamiliar forms was taxing at first, and the transformation cost him 40 MP. He flapped his wings, gained momentum, and soared into the air. As he flew, he noticed a few priests milling about, scattered around the church. After several more minutes of scouting, he returned to the hiding spot and found it empty. A commotion rose from inside the church, and he noticed the scattered priests converging on the entrance. He shouted to Issei that priests were inbound. A loud curse came from inside, and Issei asked if he could hold them off. He considered consuming them and asked if he could. Issei, focused on something else, told him to go ahead. He grinned and released a loud chirp that made many of the priests clutch their ears in pain. Issei tried to interrupt, but it was too late. He swooped down, shifted into his materialized attack form, and struck 4 priests where they stood. The remaining priests froze. The 4 struck were dispersed into ash-like motes of light that were absorbed into the weapon, each giving him 30 ashes. He counted 13 and thought that tripling that would be delightful. Issei winced and called out in surprise and pain, asking what he had released. He responded with a grin that he had released a weapon. Now that I thought about it, I would not be able to do much if I remained embedded in the ground. I decided to try materializing once more, this time as myself in the physical world. As I concentrated, a Gremory magic circle emerged from the earth, revealing a kino and red melons. I felt my consciousness shift from the mental realm into the physical one. I took a deep breath, ignoring the frozen priests and the curious Gremories as the air filled my lungs. The sensation of inhabiting a body again was exhilarating. I stood on top of the pillar, leaned down to pick up the pole of my weapon, and did a handstand. My voice carried strangely across the field, giving those nearby the chills. The protagonist expressed amusement and told the priests not to take it personally before flipping and pulling the spear with him. He executed several acrobatic spins, curling into a rolling attack as he launched himself toward the nearest priest. The man snapped out of his shock and began to speak, but the sight of the incoming attack stole his words. He let out a startled cry as the strike hit, and he was dispatched in a single, decisive blow. He vanished into ash. Landing on his feet, the protagonist gripped his blade and jabbed forward, striking 2 more attackers. They too crumbled into ash and were absorbed into the weapon. The remaining priests recovered from their shock and drew light swords and light guns. One of them shouted out orders that drew the protagonist's attention. 3 more sources of ash were absorbed into the weapon as the protagonist continued to neutralize threats with swift, precise motions. A dozen more priests emerged from the foliage. In response, the protagonist pierced the man who had shouted, ending his resistance where he stood. 2 fallen angels then appeared, Calawarner and a small blonde one in gothic clothing. The protagonist muttered a count under his breath and spun his weapon to block multiple incoming light bullets. The bullets were deflected, slashing harmlessly into the ground. 8 priests charged with swords, and the protagonist held his weapon close before spinning like a top to cut through the group in a dazzling, non-graphic display of skill. The defeated dissolved into ash and were absorbed into the weapon. He checked his ash count and smiled at the steadily increasing number. 560 out of a systemic discovery notified him of a new ability. The protagonist discovered an ability called Summon Stray Priests. The ability could call forth priests formed from the ashes he had accumulated. It required 15 ashes and could summon up to 18 at once. Grinning, the protagonist teased the remaining priests about their fallen comrades and then activated the new ability. Ash flowed from his weapon into the ground, forming humanoid figures. After a minute the ashes settled and the figures solidified into the same priests he had just defeated. In the distance he could hear the Gremories clashing with the fallen angels. The protagonist snapped his fingers and ordered the summoned priests to attack. They unsheathed swords and guns and turned on their former allies without hesitation. He gathered his weapon with both hands and rushed back into the battle. A thought crossed his mind about how things were going with Issei, but he dismissed it, confident Issei would manage. He leaped into the air, aimed his spear downward, and struck a lone priest, who gave a choked sound before collapsing. The narrator met the dying man's eyes impassively until the figure dissolved into ash. After a backflip, the protagonist landed with his naginata resting on his shoulder and the remains turning to ash. He noticed the last of the priests pressed into a circle. Grinning, he charged forward and with a single elegant swing, He cleaved through the circle in a sweeping move that sent multiple figures down and reduced them to ash. In one motion he eliminated 31 stray priests. He felt a surge of accomplishment, then turned to watch the Gremmaries fight. The smaller, Gothic-clad fallen angel was flying away, while Calawarner lay on the ground with her legs ruined. The protagonist entered the church just as the final blow struck. He used his connection to reach out to Issei and asked if it was a good time for him to return. It took a few moments for Issei to answer. Issei reported that they were running down a flight of stairs beneath the altar. The protagonist looked and saw a shifted altar with a trapdoor leading to the stairwell. The protagonist asked Issei if he should return. Issei asked him to come back, and the protagonist agreed before willing his body to dissipate. He gained experience from the battle, earning 1,350 points in total, and leveled up 5 times. They finally reached the bottom of the staircase. While Issei and the others were racing down, he relayed what had happened inside the building, explaining that Fried Selzen had been waiting for them and had clashed with them before fleeing in a blinding flash. They came upon a large set of doors. Kaneko did not hesitate and kicked them open, sending them off their hinges. Issei charged in, followed by the 2 girls. A small sea of priests separated them from Asia, who was bound to a cross and trembling while Rainier hovered nearby. Rainier greeted them, addressing them as devils. The priests turned as one and drew their light swords. Issei ignored the priests and stared at Asia on the cross. Issei called out Asia's name sharply. Asia stirred and looked up in surprise at his voice, asking if it was really him. Issei smiled and raised his voice to declare that he had come to rescue her. A tear of relief slipped down Asia's face. Rainier chuckled, amused. Rainier then announced that the reunion was touching but too late. The ritual was nearly complete. Issei, Kaneko, and Kiba reacted with alarm as Asia cried out in pain and began to glow with a pale light. Issei reached for her but was blocked by the priests. One priest warned that he would not allow interference and brandished his sword. Another shouted that he would destroy the devils. Issei pushed forward, angry, and pulled the narrator his sacred gear closer, preparing to act. Kaneko stepped forward and struck one priest aside with a forceful blow, leaving him groaning and clutching his ribs. Behind Issei, Kiba drew her long sword and declared that she would go all out against the priests, glaring at the formation of men. She added quietly that she also wanted to impress Issei, but the narrator did not comment on that. Asia screamed again as a glowing light concentrated on her chest and formed an orb that floated upward. Rainier flew to it and cupped the orb, bringing it close. Rainier cried out that this was the power she had craved sacred gear and that with it she would be loved. She hugged the orb, creating a flash. When the light faded, Rainier glowed with a green aura. She laughed triumphantly, declaring that she finally had supreme power and would use it to become a greater fallen angel and to get revenge on those who had looked down on her. Issei ignored Rainier's boasting and hurried to the cross while the others prevented the priests from closing in. He ran up, untied Asia's hands and legs, and knelt, cradling her in his arms. Asia murmured Issei's name weakly. Issei told her that he had come to take her back and gently rubbed her head. Asia answered faintly, sounding tired and distant. Rainier glared and explained that possessors whose sacred gear was taken away would die, and that the girl was going to die. Issei demanded that Rainier return the sacred gear, but Rainier refused, saying she had deceived her superiors to get it and that she intended to kill them all and erase the evidence. She sneered that she did not want Issei calling her name and laughed. At that, the narrator Issei's sacred gear materialized into a more human, airy form and leaned on Issei's shoulder. The sacred gear spoke a single command to consume, and Issei ordered that the priests be stopped from interfering. The narrator shifted into a small avian form, swooped up under the ceiling, and then dove toward the priests. Instead of inflicting graphic harm, the sacred gear moved with precise, decisive strikes that incapacitated several priests and scattered the formation. One priest rushed forward to attack, but the sacred gear leapt and struck him down in a non-graphic, swift maneuver that left him unable to continue. The others recoiled in shock. The sacred gear rose, spinning its weapon and presenting it on its shoulder in a defiant stance, and taunted the remaining priests. When one priest objected that the act had been callous and asked if the weapon felt remorse, the sacred gear replied that it had been created to protect its wielder and that it answered to that purpose. It then moved again and struck another priest, ending his resistance without gruesome detail. As the battle intensified, the sacred gear felt a fierce rush of adrenaline and focus rather than any graphic hunger. The assembled priests visibly trembled. The sacred gear raised a hand and summoned spectral copies of priests from Ash and Shadow, 31 transient figures wielding swords and guns. They formed and moved with empty expressions and then turned to confront their former comrades. The summoned figures engaged the priests, creating chaos in their ranks. While the priests were distracted, the sacred gear maneuvered around Kaneko and Kiba and pulled them to a corner for a quick private check. The sacred gear released them. Kiba began to speak but was interrupted as the battlefield continued to shift and the group prepared their next moves. She asked nervously what the speaker wanted to talk about, and Kaneko fidgeted beside her. The narrator replied that it was nothing bad and simply a question, which drew relieved sighs from them. Yumi blinked in confusion. Yumi then asked what the narrator wanted to ask. The narrator grinned and asked casually whether Yumi liked Issei. The narrator watched amused as both girls flushed different shades of red. Kaneko's cheeks tinted pink while Yumi's face went bright crimson and she began to stammer a reply the narrator could not make out. The narrator told her to calm down and clarified that they were not asking if she wanted to marry Issei, which only made Yumi more flustered. She pressed her hands to her cheeks, visibly embarrassed. The narrator noticed a stream of ashes flowing back into their blade. Looking around, they saw that the sea of priests had been whittled down to just a few. Of the 31 priests, only 7 remained. When the narrator turned back to report this, they found Yumi unconscious from embarrassment, her face still flushed, while Kaneko fanned her head. The narrator thought they were going to be here for a while. They also noticed that Issei's sacred gear had changed. After the confrontation, the narrator grumbled mentally about having to watch over their wielder's schoolmate when she fainted from embarrassment. They could have been out fighting the priests, but instead they were making sure Yumi would not be harmed by any light-based countermeasures. At least the narrator got to watch Issei land a solid punch on Rainier with his newly upgraded gauntlet, though Rainier was knocked through a window. Sighing, the narrator motioned for Kaneko to follow. Kaneko picked up Kiba and slung her over a shoulder before they moved toward the broken window in the strange underground church. As they passed, the defeated priests and the narrator's ash constructs dissolved and flowed back into the narrator, restoring their reserves. The narrator noted an overflowing amount of ashes. The narrator shifted into a bird form and flew through the shattered window. Using a form a second time required no additional ashes. From above, they saw Rainier on the ground backing away from Issei, who had teleported through a hole in the wall leading downward. The narrator landed on Issei's shoulder and tilted their head. Issei quietly whispered a single word, translated as "I'll eat," which made the narrator tilt their head in curiosity. A hidden room lay beyond the broken window, and the others were gathering there. Red Melon stepped forward to stand over the terrified Rainier as her borrowed sacred gear began to fade and her body showed signs of recovery. Rainier had fainted from the shock of facing Issei. Whatever bravado, she had disappeared once the narrator and the others appeared. Red Melons addressed the fainted fallen angel, and Aquino responded affirmatively, raising a hand to conjure a ball of water. Aquino splashed the water onto Rainier, and after coughing and sputtering Rainier returned to consciousness. Red Melons asked Rainier how she was doing, and Rainier looked up with a mixture of terror and anger. Rainier muttered something about the daughter of the Gremory clan. The redhead smiled and introduced herself as Rias Gremory, the next heir of the House of Gremory, adding that it was brief but that it was nice to make her acquaintance. Rainier glared and sneered in response. Rainier claimed that her plan had been secret and insisted that other fallen angels were supporting her, promising that they would intervene if she was in danger. Red Melons denied that claim and explained that those other fallen angels would not help because Red Melons had already eliminated 2 of them, Calawarner and Middled. Rainier protested, and Red Melons produced 2 feathers as proof, taunting Rainier about recognizing them. Red Melons recounted how she had gone to confront a few fallen angels she suspected were plotting in town, bringing Aquino with her. When she questioned them, They had blurted that they intended to help Rainier in exchange for advancement. Red Melons described their arrogance and dismissed them as fools who had overestimated their position. The narrator wondered whether this was the plot those fallen angels had been planning, and Issei wondered the same. Suddenly tears appeared at the corners of Issei's eyes, and the narrator silently chided him for getting sentimental. Yumi offhandedly commented that the princess of the duke who wielded the power of destruction, the club president, was a powerful devil considered a genius among the young devils. The narrator thought briefly about whether that implied a ninja or stealthy skill set. Red Melons looked at Issei and then at his gauntlet with widening eyes. She muttered that it was a red dragon mark and that such a mark had not been present until recently. She stared at Rainier, who flinched under her gaze. Red Melons informed Rainier that Hyde Issei's sacred gear was not ordinary, which explained why Rainier had been defeated. She explained that boosted gear was said to be the rarest of sacred gears and that the red dragon mark on the gauntlet was evidence. She asked rhetorically if Rainier had heard of the name before, resting a hand against her cheek. Meanwhile Rainier stiffened, gulping with wide, shocked eyes. She explained that the boosted gear, one of the Longinus, even if only temporarily, was said to have the power to surpass Mao and God. She told them that its ability doubled the possessor's power every 10 seconds, so a power that began at 1 could rise to the level of leader-class fallen angels and high-class devils, and that, if fully mastered, it could even slay a god. Her voice trembled with disbelief. Rias listened and found the information intriguing. She nodded once, then walked over to them. She reached out and patted Issei on the head before raising a finger and scratching the narrator's head in a way that felt very comfortable. Rias remarked that it was to be expected from her servant, that Issei was an interesting boy, and that she would come to cherish him even more. The narrator did not mind the attention. The petting was relaxing. Issei stepped back from the touch, looking unsettled, but soon composed himself. Issei bowed and apologized to Rias, acknowledging that when he had vowed to save Asia he had spoken rudely because he thought she would not help. He admitted that he had been wrong to blame her, and then broke down, tears falling as he said he had failed to protect Asia. Rias gently patted his head and hugged him in a comforting, almost maternal way. She told him that he need not cry and that, given how he stood now, no one would blame him. She reminded him that his failings were simply due to inexperience as a devil and urged him to become stronger. She declared she would train him hard from then on, naming him her pawn, Issei. Determined, Issei set his jaw and nodded in agreement. Rias then turned to Rainier and said she would finish what remained to be done. She raised a hand and began to form a pulsing red orb, announcing that she would make the fallen angel disappear and that she would retrieve the sacred gear. Rainier scrambled backward and fell onto her rear, protesting that the healing power belonged to Azazel and Shemhaza, pleading that it should not be taken. Rias responded that living for love was admirable but that Rainier had been corrupted, lacking elegance, and that she would not allow it. She raised her arm and intensified the orb. At that moment Fried Selzen arrived on the scene, calling out as he approached and noticing Rainier on the ground. He observed the situation with a smirk, then gave Rainier a casual assessment and declined to intervene. He mocked her briefly before sweeping his attention toward Issei with an odd enthusiasm, telling Issei that he found him worthy of attention and suggesting they fight next time. His tone was theatrical and teasing rather than earnest. With a final, dramatic farewell and a reminder to take care of himself, Fried disappeared into the shadows. Rias refocused on Rainier and resumed her attempt to end the threat. Rainier, desperation clear on her face, called out to Issei and begged for help, insisting that the devil intended to kill her. Her tone carried pleading and a fragile hope. Issei issued a single, calm command for the narrator to consume. The narrator asked for confirmation, and Issei affirmed the order. The narrator complied. Flapping wings, the narrator rose into the air and, once at sufficient height, dove while transforming. Issei stepped forward, raised his hand, and gripped the sacred gear pole as the narrator completed the transformation and descended. The combined strike connected with Rainier, and her form was dispersed and sealed away in a flash of light, leaving no graphic trace. Asia's sacred gear was left unharmed. A notification followed, summarizing what had occurred and the benefits gained. A new ability had been discovered, named Summon Rainair. Noting that the fallen angel Rainair had been consumed, the requirement and limits were recorded, and the narrator gained a large sum of experience, which resulted in 2 level-ups. After the action, the narrator remained in bird form. Jewelry clinked as 2 simple rings fell to the ground. Rias lowered her orb and moved forward to collect the rings. After she finished, Rias turned to Issei, who stood frozen, and told him to return the piece to Asia Argento. Issei stammered that Asia was already gone. Then, still shaken, he thanked the president and everyone for fighting for him and Asia and struggled to find the words as Rias held something in her hand. Issei managed to ask what it was. Rias explained that it was a bishop chess piece. She said that devils with a peerage receive 15 chess pieces in total, 8 pawns, 2 knights, 2 rooks, 2 bishops, and 1 queen. The role of the bishop was to support the other members of the group, and Asia's healing power would be suited to that role. Rias placed the bishop piece on Asia's chest. Rias announced that she would reincarnate Asia as a devil. She extended her arms and formed a magic circle on Asia's chest. Invoking her name, Rias ordered Asia Argento to be resurrected and reborn as her servant and bishop. The bishop piece and Asia's sacred gear merged into her. Issei, surprised, wondered whether such a resurrection had ever been done before. Rias completed the ritual and waited. After a short while, Asia winced and slowly opened her eyes. Issei ran to her side and knelt, tears running down his face. Asia blinked in confusion. Issei looked at Rias with gratitude. Rias returned a warm smile. Rias explained that she had resurrected Asia because her healing power could even help devils. She then told Issei, with a soft chuckle, that he would protect Asia from now on as her senior devil. Issei agreed without hesitation. Asia rubbed her eyes as if waking from a nap and murmured Issei's name. Issei embraced her and whispered that they should go home. Asia hugged him back and replied that she would. The next day, Red Melons had gone to find a home for Asia, since Asia was now part of the peerage. The narrator returned to the mindscape and found an overflowing ash dune. After searching around, the narrator located the previous 5 crates, several more crates, and some barrels, and had emptied their ash reserves in the process. A voice in the narrator's head urged them to wake up and put some spirit into it. The narrator glanced at Issei as he turned off his clock. Issei got up, stretched quickly, and hurried into the bathroom, leaving the narrator wondering what had gotten into him. An hour later, Issei had forgotten about the narrator, so the narrator transformed into a bird and followed him. As the narrator flew into the school grounds, members of the student council stared. The narrator ignored them and flew toward the old school building. Nearing the building, the narrator overheard Red Melons speaking to Issei. Red Melons explained that when she had learned the truth, she had decided to make him her servant. For a while she had been uncertain, but she was now convinced because Issei possessed the boosted gear, a sacred gear of very high value. She compared it to the legendary Longinus and said that was why he was so valuable to her. Red Melons went on to describe how, when she had tried to reincarnate him, the only pieces she had left were 1 knight, 1 rook, 1 bishop, and 8 pawns. To make him her servant she had used all 8 pawns, and his compatibility with the pawn had been good. The other pieces had lacked the power to reincarnate him, and the pawn's full value and its promotion remained mysterious. She had gambled on that possibility, and the result had been best for Issei. Red Melon smiled and patted Issei's cheek. She then drew his face in close and gave him a brief, affectionate kiss on the forehead before letting him go. Issei showed a small blush from the gesture. Red Melons called it a good luck charm and urged him to become stronger. She added, with a mischievous look, that she should stop adoring him so openly because the new girl might get jealous. Issei blinked in confusion, then stiffened. His expression hardened and a tense aura flickered behind him. He turned slowly in a mechanical manner and found Asia standing behind him, smiling but with a slight twitch at the corner of her eye. Asia's voice carried a thin edge as she addressed him, and Issei swallowed nervously. Asia glanced from Issei to Rias and then began nervously fidgeting with her fingers. She admitted to herself that Rias was very beautiful and that Issei might like her, but she immediately rebuked the thought and asked for forgiveness for having such feelings. She then held her head and complained of a headache. Red Melons treated the complaint matter-of-factly and explained that a devil making a prayer to God could have that effect. Asia accepted the explanation solemnly and said that, now that she had become a devil, she felt she could no longer face God. Issei patted her back sympathetically. Red Melons asked Asia if she regretted her decision. After a moment, Asia shook her head and said she did not regret it. She was happy as long as she was with Issei. Issei's face reddened at that, and Red Melons smiled in response. Red Melons then declared that Asia would become part of her servant group and would work alongside Issei. Asia brightened and promised to do her best. Issei noticed Asia's uniform and asked about it, studying her clothing as she did a small twirl. Asia asked shyly whether it suited her. Issei praised her appearance enthusiastically, still embarrassed and flushed. Red Melons cleared her throat into her hand, then announced that she had arranged for Asia to attend their school. Since Asia was about the same age as Issei, Red Melons placed her in the same year and the same class. She told Issei to look after Asia on her first day. Issei jumped up with determination and then immediately sank back into embarrassment as he sat down. The remaining 3 members of the peerage arrived. Akino greeted the student council president, Issei, and Asia as she took her place behind Red Melons. Kaneko offered a quiet morning greeting to the group and sat across from Asia while pulling out a melon bread. Yumi also greeted everyone cheerfully and sat next to Issei. Once the group was assembled, Red Melons stood and clapped to get their attention. Red Melons suggested starting a small morning gathering in honor of the new members. She produced a cake with a snap of her fingers and explained that it was nice to gather sometimes to celebrate. Everyone agreed to the idea and prepared to eat. From outside the window, the narrator, still in bird form, pecked at the glass to be let in and indicated that they had been doing so for a while. A short neutral pause bridged the moment before the group moved to enjoy the cake together. Recently the dragon had been trying to make contact with Issei. Each day, slowly but surely, the dragon made progress. Phoenix did not interfere, believing Issei needed every bit of help to get stronger. Speaking of which, Issei was beginning to awaken. Issei twisted and turned, sweat beading on his face. After another roll, he forced himself upright, breathing heavily and looking around. He glanced at the clock. It was only 4:30. He threw off his blanket, pulled on a jersey, opened the window just enough for Phoenix to squeeze out, and ran down the stairs and out the door. It had been a month since Issei's resurrection. He sprinted toward the park with Red Melons speeding after him on a bike. The only thing wrong was that someone had discovered his weakness, Gundam. After showing him a picture of an RX-78-2 Gundam, the prankster had teased him with it on a string and stick, keeping the picture just out of reach. When they reached the park, Phoenix decided to snatch the picture. As Issei reached for it, Phoenix swooped, grabbed it with his beak, and flew off. Phoenix watched from a branch as Issei began doing push-ups, finding his cries of frustration quietly amusing. Red Melons reminded Issei that an ability was meaningful only when the basics were strong, then sat on his back. Issei counted aloud as he did push-ups until 70, and Red Melons stepped off him. Red Melons commented that he was talking while doing push-ups, and noted his growth, asking unsympathetically whether she should add another 100. Issei could only wince. Red Melons checked her wristwatch and thought it should be about time for someone to arrive. Issei asked who was coming. Asia called out as she ran toward them, and everyone turned. She stumbled but quickly recovered. Asia offered Issei a cup of tea, and Issei accepted it gratefully, sipping and letting out a contented sigh. Phoenix flew down onto Asia's shoulder and gently pecked her. She petted Phoenix's head in response. Issei asked Asia why she was there, and Asia blushed. She explained that she had heard Issei and the president trained every morning and wanted to help, though that day she had only managed to prepare tea. Issei thanked her and glanced at the president, who looked distant. He asked what was wrong. The president blinked, smiled, and said it was nothing. It was actually good timing. She decided to have something taken care of that day and suggested they head over to his house because the luggage was due to arrive. 10 minutes later, Issei stood in front of a pile of boxes, eyebrows twitching in disbelief. The president gestured toward them and told him to carry the boxes to his room. Issei protested that he would have to carry them into his own house, but the president nodded as if that were the point. She explained that the boxes contained Asia's belongings and that carrying them would be what a gentleman would do. The president confirmed that from that day, Asia would be living in his house. Phoenix landed on Issei's shoulder, and Issei reacted with a shocked cry. The president chuckled, and Asia responded with a joyful, stunned cry. This was not the reaction I was expecting. I had expected Mrs. Hayadu to at least express shock over the arrangements, but she accepted them as if they were talking about the weather. Red Melons asked the Hayadu parents if they would allow Asia Argento to stay in their home. The parents looked up and whispered to each other. Mr. Hayadu asked if her name was Asia. Asia turned and gave a small bow, confirming that she was the girl Red Melons had mentioned. I was sitting on top of the TV, so I had a good view. Mr. Hayadu suddenly became tearful and said that the idea of a foreign girl calling him father moved him in a warm, unexpected way. Mrs. Hayadu and Issei exchanged disapproving looks. Mrs. Hayadu pinched her husband's cheek to bring him back to his senses. Mr. Hayadu cleared his throat and pointed out that their son showed little romantic interest, so it might be better for Asia to stay in a home with a girl. Red Melons immediately offered another idea. Red Melons casually suggested that Asia could become their daughter. Mr. Hayadu reacted with surprise. Red Melons then praised Issei, explaining that both she and Asia saw something in him. Although he lacked subtlety and was blunt, he had a passionate determination to face obstacles head-on. She said both she and Asia were drawn to that determination, and she turned to Asia to confirm. Asia smiled and nodded. She explained that Issei had saved her by risking his life and had been very helpful to her at school, listing the many small things he had done for her. Each compliment made Issei shrink a little, hiding his face behind his hands. Red Melons then suggested that the homestay could also serve as training in living together and family etiquette, which shocked everyone. Mr. Hayadu burst into tears, confessing that he had feared never seeing grandchildren and had worried about Issei living alone when he became old. Mr. Hayadu sobbed that, given how Issei was, he had long resigned himself to that worry. He then took Asia's hands and asked if he could entrust their son to her care. Asia said earnestly that Issei was not worthless and that he was a wonderful person, which softened Mr. Hayadu's expression. Mrs. Hayadu began to weep with relief. Calming a bit, Mr. Hayadu told Red Melons that they would welcome Asia into their home. He clasped Asia's hands and gave Red Melons an enthusiastic thumbs up. Red Melons smiled in approval and turned to Asia. Red Melons thanked Mr. Hayadu and asked Asia to be polite and get along with Issei's parents while staying with Issei. Asia, still hesitant, asked if it would be a burden to stay. Mr. Hayadu reassured her that it was fine and that staying with a Japanese family would help her get used to the culture and lifestyle, adding with a laugh that she might even stay permanently. Mrs. Hayadu joined in the laughter. Issei had no control or role in the conversation. Red Melons reminded Asia that she had previously said she wanted to live with Issei without hesitation. Asia blushed at the reminder, then bowed and said she would be in their care and would live with Issei and his parents. The family welcomed her into the household. Red Melons watched the scene with a conflicted look and murmured to herself about the idea of preparing for family life. A few days later, it had been a couple of days since Asia moved into the household. Issei and Asia had fallen into a routine of walking to school together. The narrator, a small bird, flew above them, drifting toward the school. Asia cheerfully remarked that the weather was pleasant and that they would be playing softball in physical education today. She added that it was her first time and she was excited. A boy muttered that it seemed odd that Asia was walking from the same direction as Issei. A girl reacted with horror, wondering what was going on. Issei ignored the outbursts and glanced at Asia, who smiled at him. Issei asked if there were any problems at school and whether Asia was getting along with the other girls. Asia replied that everyone had been kind, teaching her about Japan, that she had made many friends, and that she had been invited to go shopping with them. Before Issei could respond, a boy called out a cheerful good morning and another complimented how Asia's blonde hair shone. Asia returned their greetings, and the two boys reacted dramatically, clutching their chests. Matsuda asked Motohama if that was the reason, and Motohama agreed that being greeted by a beauty in the morning made their day. Issei watched his glasses-wearing friend with mild amusement until Matsuda suddenly jabbed him in the stomach and tripped him, sending him stumbling to the floor. Matsuda teased that he had heard Issei walk to school with Asia every day. Issei, steadying himself, asked what Matsuda meant. Matsuda and Motohama pressed him, wondering why he and Asia came from the same direction. Issei explained that he lived with Asia and asked Asia to confirm. Asia said that she was being taken care of at Issei's house. The classroom erupted in shocked voices. Matsuda dropped to his knees and protested that it could not be true, fretting that Issei seemed to know many attractive girls, Rias and Akino among them, and declaring it unfair. Issei gave off a visible aura of annoyance that his classmates ignored. Motohama begged Issei to introduce them to someone. Issei, part annoyed and part amused, agreed, pulled out his phone, and searched his contacts. He stepped into a corner, made a call, and returned with a devious smile. He said he had found someone willing to meet them who would bring friends and told the others to contact that person by message first, then showed them the number. Matsuda eagerly grabbed the phone, copied the number into his device, and promised he would not forget the favor, flashing a grin that made a few of the girls blush. Motohama declared they would arrange a group outing and find girlfriends. A breeze caught the narrator's attention and drew its gaze toward the old school building, where something shiny lay near the ruins. Curious, the bird spread its wings and flew to a nearby branch. The object was a mirror. Feeling a little foolish for being intrigued, the narrator turned to fly back toward the classroom window but froze when a hint of red caught its eye. Perched on another branch, the narrator watched as a large red bird appeared, about the size of a hawk, with fiery highlights along its feathers. The two birds stared at each other until the school bell rang. The narrator blinked, flew back toward Issei, and glanced over its shoulder to see the red bird vanish in a streak of fire. Issei and Asia returned to the club room, and Issei announced their arrival while the narrator remained focused on the gentle stroking of feathers by Kiba. The narrator found the sensation of being petted deeply comforting and reflected on how their view of pets had changed. Akino smiled and said she would go make some green tea, then moved toward the clubroom kitchen. Kiba offered a morning greeting to Issei with a possessive glance, and Issei acknowledged her with a wave. Kaneko greeted them quietly and opened a bag of chips. Issei and Asia crossed the room to where President Red Melons sat on the couch, staring. Issei informed the president that they had returned. Red Melons blinked, apologized for appearing dazed for a moment, and praised Asia and Issei for their work. She then announced that Asia would make her official debut as a devil that night and explained that Asia would travel to the contractor's location through the magic circle. Asia pointed at herself in surprise, and Issei looked to the president for confirmation. The president nodded and said that handing out leaflets would end that day because continuing it would only delay the next steps in Asia and Issei's relationship. Red Melons asked Akino to check whether Asia had enough demonic power to teleport through the magic circle. Akino placed a hand to her forehead and reminded everyone of the previous incident with Issei, so it was necessary to be thorough. She reported that Asia had the most demonic power after the president and Akino, noting that Asia's potential capacity was excellent. The president expressed relief and said Asia would be able to use her bishop powers fully. Issei suddenly became very emotional and began to cry, and Asia asked if he was all right. Issei spun to face the president and declared that he could not let Asia go alone, saying he felt uneasy about her traveling by herself because of the possibility of encountering unscrupulous clients. The president explained that requests of an inappropriate nature usually went to other devils who specialized in those kinds of jobs, and that the Gremory servants only handled safe, appropriate contracts. Despite the explanation, Issei remained anxious. To ease his concern, the president offered to assign Issei to accompany Asia for a short time. Issei gratefully accepted and promised to support Asia. Asia agreed to go through the magic circle together with Issei when a request came in. Akino then mentioned that a client was trying to summon them who wanted something Asia could handle. The president noted that this was convenient. Asia could provide the demonic power needed for teleportation and support Issei, who was lacking in demonic power. With that, Issei cheered and Asia agreed, and the two disappeared through the magic circle together. Left behind, the narrator relaxed into Yumi's petting while she quietly worked on her homework. Kiba told Issei that Bucho's problem might have something to do with the House of Gremory as they walked toward the old school building. The narrator noted, almost amused, that Kiba had, coincidentally, walked into Asia and Issei on the way. Issei asked whether Akino would know about it. Kiba nodded with her eyes closed and explained that Akino was Bucho's most trusted attendant and therefore would likely know. As they drew closer to the clubroom door, Yumi grew increasingly tense and acknowledged the strong presence nearby. Issei glanced at her and slowly opened the door. Inside the clubroom were Red Melons, Kaneko, Akino, and the silver-haired maid from the previous night. The narrator flew off Issei's shoulder and landed on Akino's head. Akino gave a brief, gentle smile as the narrator settled there. Yumi's tension filled the room. Asia gripped Issei's sleeve while he rested a hand on her head. Red Melons cleared her throat to gather everyone's attention and announced that she had something important to tell the club before they began. The silver-haired maid stepped forward and offered to explain, but a magic circle flared to life and interrupted her. Yumi ground her teeth and identified the manifestation as Phoenix. A blond man appeared in an open red suit, looking to be in his 20s and wearing a half-sneer as he scanned the room. He declared that it had been a while since he had come to the human world and then addressed Rias directly, saying he had come to see her. He reached for Red Melons, who forcibly shook his hand away and ordered him to let her go, her tone deadly serious. Issei, puzzled, asked who the man was. The blond man appraised Issei, then returned the question. Issei bowed politely and introduced himself as Issei Hai, servant and pawn of Rias, heiress of the House of Gremory, a display of the etiquette training he had received as a child. The man was surprised that Rias had not mentioned him to her servants. Red Melons answered that she had seen no need to do so. The maid then addressed Issei with respectful formality and identified the newcomer as Riser Phoenix, a pureblood, high-class devil and the third son of the House of Phoenix. Riser responded with a light hum and scratched his chin. A soft chirp drew the narrator's attention to a red bird perched on the couch behind Riser. Up close it looked like a red eagle with flame-like feathers. The narrator glided over and landed beside the bird. They began mirroring one another's movements, and the bird returned the narrator's greeting. The narrator learned that the bird was Riser's familiar, a burning harpy, typically a humanoid with eagle-like eyes, fiery wings, and bird legs, though she often used the bird form for scouting. Trusting the familiar, the narrator revealed that they were in fact a spirit weapon. The familiar accepted this without issue. Multiple magic circles then appeared behind Riser, and several members of his peerage materialized. The narrator did not linger on the sight. Instead, the familiar nuzzled the narrator in a comforting, friendly gesture. Asia made a small sound of affection at the sight. After a moment, the familiar rose and flew to Riser, landing beside him. Riser told Rias that the next time they met would be at the upcoming game, and then he and his peerage vanished. The narrator looked at Issei and the rest of Red Melon's peerage, noting the tension among them and reflecting that Issei now stood in a precarious position. Preparations followed after the visit. Issei lay on his bed and muttered in frustration. After the meeting with Riser, club activities had been cancelled while Red Melons and Akino remained behind to discuss matters in private. The narrator learned from Issei that Riser and Red Melons would be facing each other in a raiding game, a structured team contest in which two sides tried to eliminate the other. Perched on his head, the narrator asked Issei what he was thinking. Issei sighed and said that Bucho was in a position she did not desire. The narrator pressed, and Issei's expression darkened as he thought back to the time Red Melons had killed him before bringing him back to life. The narrator remembered the violence as a decisive, traumatic event in Issei's life rather than in grim detail. The memory underscored the complicated loyalty and danger surrounding Red Melon's choices. Due to her actions, I did not care what happened to her. Issei protested that the class president was a friend and he did not want her forced into something she did not want. I looked down from my perch and tilted my head. I told him that I had pretty much forced him to take me along, staring down into his eyes. He rolled his eyes and stood up. He replied that it had been different because he had been practically on his deathbed at the time, then sat down on the bed. I suggested that if he wanted to help the redhead, he should train. He shifted, crossed his arms, and asked what he should focus on. I told him to focus on Dragon. He had been trying to contact him for some time. I jumped off his head and floated down onto the bed. Issei repeated the names in confusion, asking whether Dragon was Drake. I blinked and asked if Drake was Dragon's name. He nodded silently, which made me think. Not getting anything more from him, I decided to head back into the mindscape. As I flew home, I noticed the Gremory clan's magic signature activating in Issei's room. Gliding down, a silver-gray light flashed from the window. I landed on the sill and peered inside. The room was in the middle of a private ritual. Rias and her maid vanished into a magic circle. There was a small latch I could use to enter. I slipped through, closed the window, and hovered beside Issei as he eased back into bed. I asked whether something had happened, then dissipated my body and returned to his mindscape. Issei muttered that he would tell me in the morning as he covered his face with the blanket. Asia announced that she had finished using the shower. Issei never explained what had happened the previous night, and I did not press him. I planned to view his memories later. As I hovered above Asia and Issei, I noticed two figures approaching rapidly, one bald and the other wearing glasses. The two called out to Issei and charged. They shouted a threat and raised their arms to strike, but they had forgotten something. Among the three of them, Issei was the fittest. Instantly he sprinted, vaulted onto their shoulders, and launched into an acrobatic cartwheel. He used the momentum to land a swift, precise move that sent the two attackers stumbling backward. The duo gaped in shock as Issei flipped and landed on his feet, leaving them reeling. Motohama stammered, his glasses cracked, and Matsuda let out a small sound before both of them collapsed in embarrassed defeat. Asia, worried for Issei, stepped around the fallen pair and moved toward him. I rose and circled above them, but I could not catch what she said. I materialized into the messy landscape of Issei's mind. Whenever he became confused or stressed, his inner world got cluttered. Sighing, I conjured a broom and set to work. I gathered today's loose memories and placed them in a blank book, then shelved it. I swept away debris and set scattered memories back on their pedestals. As I finished, I accidentally knocked over a barrel of ashes. The ash spilled across the floor. Cursing softly, I scooped the ashes back into the barrel. Near the bottom of the spill I found paper dusted with ash. After brushing it clean, I discovered notes detailing abilities I had used at the church. I retrieved a small notebook, applied the information, and watched the data transfer over. Once the transfer completed, I examined the contents. The notes described several ash summon abilities and their requirements. The stray devil visor could be consumed and recreated as an ash copy requiring 100 ashes and allowing up to 3 copies. Stray priests could be recreated as ash copies at the cost of 15 ashes each, with a maximum of 120. The fallen angel Rainier could be recreated as an ash copy for 100 ashes, up to 3 copies. I closed the book and set it on a nearby table. I intended to rematerialize into the real world when a sharp reaction from Issei drew my attention. I pulled up his latest memory but quickly closed it. There had been a private scene I chose not to view. In the club room, Rias and Akino discussed tactics with Kaneko and Yumi. Kaneko and Yumi suddenly froze. Rias and Akino asked what was wrong. Kaneko accused Issei of being perverted, her expression dark. Kiba insisted that something embarrassing had happened to Issei and earnestly maintained he was not the cause. Rias and Akino exchanged amused smiles at their friends' flustered reactions. Issei's room. I felt Issei mentally shudder in place. I asked if something had happened. He shook his head and mentioned that he had felt a shiver run up his spine before heading to sleep. I tilted my head and then shrugged. I perched on my weapon with the blade tip on the ground and waited for the next day. I glanced up from my perch when a knock sounded at the door. I was still in the mindscape, thinking about the training Issei would do later that day. Issei opened the door and, unusually serious, invited the visitor in. Asia entered, curious, walked over, and sat opposite him. Issei told Asia that he had something important to say. Asia answered with a cautious and curious tone. Issei warned that boys their age often behaved awkwardly around girls and could be embarrassing. Asia gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. Asia then asked a naive question about whether he felt the same. Feeling uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading, I spread my wings and flew away before the others noticed. I pushed down on the doorknob and opened the door to find Red Melons standing there. Issei and Asia cried out in surprise. Red Melons laughed and teased that a lover's quarrel in the morning made them seem as close as always. The two of them tried to explain, stammering, but Red Melons cut them off and told everyone to hurry and prepare for lodging because they were going to the mountains to train. Mountains. I rode atop the large bag that Issei carried as he climbed the slope, breathing heavily. Kiba rubbed his back as she carried an equally huge pack on the other side, and Kaneko carried a slightly smaller bag while nibbling on melon bread. With nothing to do for the next hour, I unfurled my wings and lifted into the air, circling the trio as Issei complained to himself. Red Melon strode ahead with a comparatively small bag, and Asia carried a duffel while looking back at Issei with concern. Asia asked if she could help Issei, but Red Melon said no, explaining that he needed to do this himself to grow stronger. Yumi gathered some herbs and slipped them into one of the bags while she massaged Issei's back. Kaneko suddenly picked up her pace, and Issei's expression changed into a competitive gleam. He sped up too, and the two of them raced toward the summit, Yumi following shortly. Eventually everyone reached the top. The group stayed at a large wooden mansion owned by the Gremory clan, hidden by the forest and demonic power but appearing for their use. After stowing their bags, Issei drank a cup of water and then collapsed unconscious. An hour later Issei was awake and getting dressed while the girls had already changed. Yumi had tended to Issei. Yumi and Issei headed toward some empty rooms to change. Yumi asked for privacy to change on her own. Issei respected that and used a separate room to get ready. I followed him. He locked the door and changed quickly before stepping out to the living room where everyone waited. Red Melons announced that they would start training outside right away and gestured toward the field. Training I watched as Issei took my weapon form and swung at Yumi. Yumi nimbly dodged and countered with her bakken, or wooden sword, blocking his attacks and guiding him with firm instruction. Yumi explained that he should not simply mirror an opponent's sword movement but pay attention to the opponent and the surroundings as well. She slipped past one of his attacks with an elegant spin and knocked his blade aside before pressing a controlled, non-lethal strike that tested his defenses. Issei continued to press forward, trying to land a hit, and Yumi adjusted with skilled, measured moves. She called out that the training was not over and readied herself, planting her blade on an open palm before sprinting forward. I could tell Issei would end the day with several bruises from the intense but orderly practice. Tabru cheerfully told the downed Issei that training would begin. Issei groaned as Tabru shifted into weapon form, materializing and gripping the blade, the flat of the blade resting on his shoulder. Issei complained that his body hurt. Tabru wondered what an aching body felt like, since weapons did not suffer soreness the way humans did, though he still remembered the brief sting when Issei had accidentally struck the blade against a wall. Issei described the sensation as being stamped on by a lot of angry girls in many places at once, naming Matsuda, Motohama, and the Kendo Club. Taburu accepted the answer with a hum and clapped to start. He instructed Issei to get up, and Issei rose slowly, sluggish but obedient. Taburu tossed his weapon to Issei, who, despite fatigue and bruises, caught it with practiced grace. Tabru estimated the training would go on for about a week and smiled as Issei groaned and they began. During the night training with Yumi Kiba, Issei already knew she was faster and stronger than he had expected. Although she carried a wooden sword, she had cracked a small boulder with one swing when he dodged, a clear measure of her strength. She pressed her assault without hesitation, and with each evasive maneuver Issei used she only grew quicker until their movements were nearly a blur. After what felt like forever, Yumi feinted and caught Issei off guard, landing a clean strike to his ribs. Issei staggered and clutched his side. Yumi looked briefly apologetic, but remained stern. She told Issei that he would not improve if he could not dodge a few attacks, that he was neither a knight nor a rook and could not try to act like one in his current state. Her assignment was to train him to track and evade incoming strikes. Issei grunted, then straightened as if the injury had not halted him. Yumi expressed surprise, suggesting recovery after such a hit would be unlikely for someone without high pain resistance or regeneration. Issei smiled and explained that Tabru was healing the damage and had temporarily removed his sense of pain. Yumi realized Tabru was his weapon and asked what kind of being Tabru was. Issei hesitated, then said Tabru would allow revealing his nature only on the condition that she kept it secret. Yumi agreed to keep the secret, and Issei revealed that Tabru was a spirit weapon. Issei explained that spirit weapons were sentient weapons with unique abilities. Many legendary arms like Durandal and Mjolnir had belonged to that class. He added that Excalibur might also have once been a spirit weapon, although it had been fractured and changed. When Yumi asked how he knew it was fractured, Issei said he only knew what Tabru had shared and that Tabru would not say more on the matter. Yumi then asked about Tabru's abilities. Issei said Tabru could manipulate ashes and could convert defeated foes into ashes to be summoned later. He noted that Tabru had demonstrated this ability when he defeated those hostile priests at the church. Issei added that Tabru was still young and would grow stronger, with future powers likely related to ashes. When Tabru withheld further details that day, Issei asked for patience and Yumi accepted the limitation, though she pouted inwardly. They returned to training. Yumi instructed Issei to use only his sacred gear this time to get accustomed to the boosted gear. She lowered her sword and then moved so quickly she appeared in front of him and tapped his midsection to test his reflexes before vanishing again, prompting Tabru to tell him to be faster. Issei grimaced, then activated the boosted gear. The red gauntlet's green jewel glowed brightly, and although his appearance did not change, the power he gave off intensified. He stepped forward, then sprinted toward Yumi, who had just reappeared a few feet ahead. She showed no surprise and dodged to the side. She swung her sword as his boosted gear flared to life, amplifying his speed and strength. He swung his armored fist for her head, but she flipped away gracefully, landed on her feet, and dashed back in with her sword poised. By the time she reached him, he had already activated his gear again and moved to meet her. His speed nearly matched hers, but she twirled around his fist and struck his armpit, stunning him briefly. She took advantage and landed several quick blows, leaving him fatigued, and then the sacred gear dimmed as reset activated. His body refused to respond and he collapsed onto the ground. Above him, Yumi giggled, hiding her mouth behind a hand. She noted merrily that he still wasn't used to his sacred gear. As she crouched beside him while he lay face-first on the ground, she fussed with his hair and noticed a small cowlick forming, smiling contently. He turned his head to glance at her and asked what she was doing. Caught, Yumi stopped and whistled to the side. He grumbled as feeling returned to his legs, then asked if she could help him get to the building. Yumi brightened immediately and agreed enthusiastically. She lifted him, slung his arm over her shoulder, and carried him toward the mansion where they were staying for training. Their close proximity caused an awkward moment when their cheeks brushed. Both blushed, and she continued helping him to the mansion. Training. Rook. Kaneko observed that he had blocked one of her attacks. Issei released her fist and jumped back, boosted gear ready to increase his strength. Blocking that strike meant some improvement, but he knew he would be truly better only when he could land a hit on her. Kaneko instructed him to go again and ped her fist back to rush forward. He held his boosted gear before him like a makeshift shield and activated it. Kaneko shot forward in a boxer-like stance and threw a punch. He dodged to the side, concentrating on that fist, but he forgot about the other one. The second punch struck his midsection and sent him flying into a tree. He steadied himself against the trunk, clutching it for support. Kaneko attacked again, aiming for his face. He backed away at the last moment. Her fist hit the tree instead, which splintered and crashed to the ground. When the dust cleared, Kaneko stepped through the smoke with blank eyes. She crouched and leapt high into the air, falling toward him foot first. He backed away, but she shifted and used her momentum, driving into him with a head-first strike. The impact knocked the wind out of him and sent him airborne, colliding with another tree that broke under the force. He hit the ground, breathless and dazed. Kaneko told him to get up, casually rubbing her wrist. She grabbed his hair, lifted him, and tossed him into the air before following him. She caught up behind him and punched his back, driving him toward the ground. She summoned her wings and shot past him, landing softly while rubbing her knuckles. As he fell, Kaneko rolled her shoulders and prepared for one final blow. She reminded herself that their training had to be relentless if their master was to avoid a future she feared. When he came within a few feet, she struck his chin with an uppercut. The blow sent him upward, and a faint trail of ash drifted away from his jaw, a reminder that he could manipulate ash even without holding his weapon. As he tumbled to the ground, two voices spoke in his head. A gruff voice urged him not to give up already, and a wispy voice teased that if he ignored Dragon-san and the other voice, he would need to do better than that. He grumbled but stayed silent. He heard a gruff voice huff. The gruff voice asked when he would properly say its name. A wispy voice replied with a hint of mischief. Another voice countered by asking when the wispy voice would introduce itself to him. The gruff voice grumbled but otherwise ignored the interruption. The gruff voice then addressed him, saying it would be bad for its reputation if its host were defeated by a cat and offering to lend some strength. The wispy voice agreed that the offer should be accepted and added that it could lend some of its own abilities to spice things up. He mentally asked who they were. The gruff voice chuckled and said it would reveal its name if he accepted the offer. He accepted. The wispy voice asked if he accepted its offer as well, and he agreed. He felt both voices grin. The gruff voice began to speak its name, but he did not hear the rest. Power coursed through his body and his mind clouded as the surge took hold. Akino instructed that they had to gather demonic energy by drifting the aura that covered their bodies. They needed to concentrate and feel the demonic energy and try again as she watched Issei and Asia attempt to use demon magic. Issei struggled while Asia managed it. Asia cried with excitement as a green aura flowed around her hands. Akino responded with amused praise, noting that Asia had talent in demonic powers and congratulating her, which made the former nun blush. Akino then explained how to change demonic energy into fire, water, and lightning by imagining it, adding that beginners often find it easier to move fire and water directly with their demonic energy. She demonstrated by aiming a finger at a water bottle on a rock. The water inside rippled and formed a spike that pierced the bottle from within. Akino asked Asia to copy what she had just done and then turned to Issei. She told him to keep concentrating on his demonic energy and emphasized that imagination was the source of the power, so it was important to materialize whatever he imagined. He looked up thoughtfully. He muttered that he could imagine anything, and at that moment the narrator had an idea. The narrator told Issei about the idea and explained it. He frowned as he considered it and said it could work but would require dedicating most of their training to accomplish. The narrator shrugged and said it was only an idea and they would understand if he chose not to pursue it. He said he would think about it. Issei grunted as he slammed into a tree for the 5th time. Kaneko assessed his progress without holding back and judged him weak. The two were sparring while she taught him how to maximize damage with his hands. She instructed him on precise strikes to the chest and how to follow through with an attack, then glared at him. She cracked her knuckles and he gulped. Kaneko ordered the next round to begin and leaped at him with her fist ped back. Red Melons encouraged him to keep going as he walked up a naturally formed path toward the summit of a steep mountain with a rock tied to his back. She sat on top of the boulder with a megaphone while the narrator watched from a small cliff. This was the 6th repetition of the exercise. When that drill ended, Red Melons announced push-ups. Issei moved into position and began, then gasped when she placed a small boulder on his back and sat down on it. He let out a strained cry as she instructed him to do 300 push-ups. He grunted but obeyed. He thought she was relentless. The narrator raised an eyebrow in response. She stilled as Issei rose slowly, ash tendrils crawling over his abdomen. His eyes glowed a pale green, a startling change from their usual light brown. He bared his teeth silently, feral, and straightened. His boosted gear flared to life. Clenching his fists, he cracked his neck as the ash tendrils receded and his wounds mended. He surged forward at a speed he had not shown before. She barely dodged aside as he shot past. An ash tentacle sprang from his elbow and lashed toward her, skimming past to pierce a tree before dissipating and leaving a neat hole. Issei dropped to the ground, hunched, and 4 ash tendrils erupted from his back, twitching erratically. They found her and pointed their tips in unison, poised to strike. She leapt onto a nearby tree as 3 of the tendrils struck the space she had just occupied. The last tendril whipped forward, coiled around the trunk, then snapped a branch free. She launched herself from the falling limb, landed on the ground, and closed the distance to Issei, who now stood upright. He glanced at her and growled with barely contained hostility. He turned and ran straight at her, boosted gear primed. She braced herself to intercept his attack, then jumped and used her hands to latch onto his extended fist, pushing off to flip behind him. She swung at his head to try to knock him out, but a thin wall of ash intercepted her blow and absorbed it. She backed away and used her wings to move herself out of range. Issei halted and faced her. The fury in his expression had lessened, leaving a hard annoyance instead. He clenched his armored fist and raised it into the air. Kaneko landed cautiously and watched him, uncertain what he would do next. When he remained motionless, she decided to press the attack. She launched herself with her wings, aiming to land a decisive strike. She flew forward with her arm poised to clothline him, but he unfurled his own wings and barely cleared her, gliding overhead. Her momentum carried her forward helplessly, and she became vulnerable to his next move. Issei aimed his armored hand at her. A golden insignia shimmered above the green jewel at his palm as a small red orb formed and stabilized. He closed his hand around the orb, drew his arm back, and drove it forward, releasing a concentrated beam that struck her from behind. She cried out and was hurled into a stand of trees, the blast snapping trunks and scattering debris. Her momentum carried her into a large boulder, where she landed hard and slid to the ground, leaving a shallow impact mark where she struck. Issei grunted as he surveyed the aftermath of the attack. Seeing Kaneko collapsed, he took it as victory and shouted into the air in triumph. Moments later he felt his energy drain away. The ash that had cloaked him slumped and fell to the ground. A resetting signal echoed from his sacred gear as his consciousness began to fade. He heard a familiar voice telling him that he had done well, then drifted into unconsciousness. Kaneko stood over Issei amid the craters and ruined trees. She glanced down at her back to find the fabric of her clothing badly scorched by the blast. Only her role as a rook had spared her from worse injury. She knelt, slung his arm over her shoulder, and carried him toward the mansion. Kaneko muttered that he was an idiot and addressed him as her upperclassman. The peerage ate an assortment of freshly caught prey fish, boar, pheasant, and deer prepared so skillfully by Akino that the spread looked fit for a professional chef. Issei commented that the food was delicious as he separated a bit of fish with his chopsticks. Akino refilled his bowl with rice and encouraged everyone to eat as much as they wanted. He nodded and returned to his meal, inwardly overwhelmed by how good it tasted. Taboo shimmered into the physical realm and hovered behind Issei's head. Rias asked if he wanted to join them. He shook his head and huffed. Tabaru complained that Issei was crying a lot in his mindscape, which made it difficult for him to review and edit memories in peace. The remark drew looks from everyone at the table. Rias asked hesitantly about editing memories, and Tabaru confirmed that he could edit both past and present memories. He sent Rias a small, knowing glare that made her uneasy. She received his silent message that he knew what she had done and fell quiet. Kiba broke the silence cheerfully and asked if there were any memories Tabaru might reveal to the group. Tabaru considered and produced a book, flipping through it while muttering to himself about various incidents. When a particular memory came up, Issei reacted with a fierce glare and pleaded with Tabaru not to show that one. Tabaru found it odd that Issei seemed so accepting of letting others see his memories. Issei explained that he intended to spend the rest of his life with these people and wanted to show how much he trusted them. Everyone smiled at that. Tabaru remained expressionless as he continued searching. Tabaru tore out a page, closed the book, and turned the page into a stream of particles that coalesced into spectral figures on a cleared space. The figures enacted a memory of extreme urgency, someone shouting for another to wake up and warning that they were in danger. The scene was frantic and intense but non-graphic. Everyone blinked at the spectacle. In the memory, Issei woke with a start, pushed the blanket aside, and felt the sudden presence of someone beside him. A breeze from an open window snapped him fully awake. He realized he was not alone. Some members of the peerage blushed at the awkwardness of the situation. Others reacted with amusement or mild embarrassment. Rias herself looked both amused and embarrassed as Issei stared in stunned silence. In the memory, a woman who sounded like his mother called that it was time to get ready for school. Issei sprang to his feet and waved frantically at Tabaru, begging him to stop. Tabaru raised an eyebrow and asked if he was sure. Issei nodded desperately, and Tabaru obliged, making the memory shimmer out of view. A few disappointed noises rippled through the audience. Issei pleaded with Tabaru not to do that again. Tabaru dismissed him with a casual look that nevertheless betrayed amusement. Kiba then asked what Tabaru looked like without his hat and mask. Tabaru declined to answer and began to disappear, legs first, back into the mindscape. He reminded Issei to remember what would happen next time. Issei nodded. Tabaru fully withdrew, and with him gone the display ended. The group resumed their meal. After they finished eating and cleaned up, the group prepared for the night. Rias cheerfully suggested that everyone use the outdoor bath together. Akino agreed with a sweet smile. Kiba reacted with a surprised, blushing protest. Kaneko remained silent, giving Rias a disappointed glare and being ignored. Asia stammered, blushing. Issei refused, explaining that his mother had told him to only bathe with the woman he would marry, which earned him blank stares. Tabaru, in bird form, landed on Issei's shoulder and gave a sagely nod. Rias, amused, asked if that meant he wanted to marry someone there. Two blondes stiffened and fixed intense stares on him. Issei did not answer. He walked past toward the bath and glanced back once, offering a small smile that went unseen by those watching the ground. Training, queens and bishops. Issei panted from another failed attempt to call forth his demonic energy. Tabaru insisted Issei had access to it, but Issei could not wield it for some reason. He had learned the day before that he had fired some kind of energy beam during a spar with Kaneko, though he remembered nothing of the moment and Kaneko refused to explain. Tabaru and another gruff voice also declined to reveal what had happened, leaving Issei without anything concrete to study or improve from. Akino sighed, drawing his attention. Akino observed that he was doing it wrong again. Behind her, Asia steadily progressed in learning to command elemental magic. Issei felt a twinge of envy at her control but was genuinely happy for her success, just as she had been pleased when he showed skill with polearms. Akino decided to demonstrate a more visual method. She beckoned Issei closer, positioned him by her side, and indicated a nearby tree with an open hand. Akino began moving her hand as if shaping something invisible, then asked Issei to copy her. He mirrored her stance and extended his hand toward the tree. She guided him to picture a flowing river, then to imagine a branch of the stream diverting from the main flow. After a moment of concentration, he felt a subtle sensation brush past his outstretched hand. She told him to imagine scooping a handful from that branching stream. When he visualized cupping water and pulling his hand away, he felt that same sensation enter his palm. Next, Akino demonstrated shaping the energy. A reddish glow gathered in her hand and condensed into an orb, which then formed into an arrow of electricity. Issei followed her steps. The energy in his hand condensed into an orb and took the form of an ice cone. Akino explained the final step, to imagine the spell launching itself away from the palm, as if repelled. She released her electric arrow toward the tree. It struck with force, embedding halfway and leaving cracks in the bark. Issei visualized the motion and released his ice cone. The ice cone struck the tree, barely piercing the wood but coating the trunk in a layer of ice. Akino praised Issei for the result and congratulated him. Asia then rushed over, excited to show that she had succeeded as well. She stretched both hands toward the trees, gathered power that traveled down her arms and changed color from yellow to pale blue, and pushed it forward. 2 bolts of blue energy shot from her hands and struck the trees. Smoke rose where the bolts hit, leaving 2 charred pillars. One tree began to split and fall while the other cracked and crumbled. Asia stood tired but beaming, hopeful at their approval. Issei, however, was several feet away on his knees under an imaginary rain cloud, looking dejected. Akino noticed his mood and crouched beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder in concern. He looked up with a depressed expression and lamented that all his effort felt wasted. Akino tried to cheer him, amused, while Asia's attempts to comfort him fell short. Then Akino asked about Tabaru and whether Issei and the bird had any combined techniques. Issei composed himself, the rain cloud fading, and admitted he might have something. After a brief pause, he produced a pocket watch from his pocket. He shook the pocket watch and a few specks of ash fell into his open palm. Realizing they were ash, he swallowed them and took a deep breath. She asked what he was doing, but he did not answer and continued to inhale until his cheeks bulged. Sensing something in the air, she beckoned Asia closer. Issei began to sweat and his face flushed from the large intake of air. He trembled and her danger sense flared. Grabbing Asia, she shot upward just as he leaned forward and released the breath he had been holding. A great stream of flames erupted from his mouth and swept beneath them. The two of them watched as the flames roared for nearly a minute before gradually dwindling. When the fire faded, it left a scorched path behind. Akino stood speechless at what she saw. Asia had been knocked unconscious the moment the fire passed beneath them. Issei panted as he deflected another light bullet. He had been training for a week, focusing on blocking and dodging at Tabaru's suggestion. He had agreed thinking it would be easy, except Tabaru had not mentioned using his summons during the exercise. The summoned weapons had produced a quartet of priests, each armed with both light swords and light guns. Surviving the training had become a daunting challenge. It was made worse when one of the priests abandoned its gun and switched to a sword, forcing him to dodge holy projectiles while also defending against holy blades. Tabaru watched him struggle with a bored air and encouraged him to do better. Issei snapped back that Tabaru was not the one keeping himself alive. Tabaru feigned confusion and said that if it was too easy he would have to raise the difficulty. Issei cursed under his breath as another quartet of priests materialized. He hated the training, and Tabaru acknowledged that he knew. Issei frowned as he tried to manipulate the pile of ashes around him. Tabaru suggested that he imagine the grains of ash being attached to each other to make control easier. Issei considered the advice and tested it, picturing each speck tied together by rope, but the effort gave him a headache. Forehead to ease the pain and prepared to continue when Tabaru warned that someone was approaching. Issei glanced over his shoulder and saw the silhouette of a short figure. The figure stepped into the light and revealed long black hair, gray eyes, and pale skin, dressed in Gothic Lolita fashion. The sudden appearance made Issei feel awkward and unsure how to respond. The girl said that she would regain the silence, then walked past him and disappeared back into the forest. Issei asked who she had been, but there was no answer. The sun was beginning to set, and Issei had only caught 2 fish. He had actually caught about a dozen, but Kaneko kept snatching them up and disappearing, so he had to resort to using Tabaru's storage. Tabaru told Issei that he hated him. Issei asked why, curious. Tabaru snorted and shifted his stance. He complained that a weapon was not meant for menial tasks like descaling fish. He pulled back, sending the fish he had caught into the air and into the bucket behind them with a splash. Issei suggested that Tabaru should put the fish into his storage, but Tabaru looked away and said he was not talking to him. At that moment a priest was summoned and positioned itself, guarding the bucket zealously. Kaneko appeared from a tree, glancing at the bucket with an intent expression. She began to creep toward it, but the priest drew its sword hilt and summoned a blade of light, stepping between her and the fish. Kaneko tensed and glared at the priest. Contrary to what others believed, she loved fish more than sweets and would give up sweets in an instant for fish. Tabaru glanced behind and raised an eyebrow as another priest materialized, pulling out a firearm. Kaneko narrowed her eyes and prowled to the side, studying the 2 priests. She took a careful step forward, adopting a boxer's stance as if preparing for a fight. The priest with the gun sheathed it, shifted to its sword hilt, and swung to the side. Kaneko grunted and lunged, arms close to her face. One of the priests broke from the bucket and rushed forward with its sword raised. It swung, But Kaneko dodged to the left, ped her arm back, and moving beside the priest, landed a solid blow to its midsection that sent it crashing into a nearby tree. The priest slumped to the ground, motionless. The second priest tensed and charged to avenge its comrade. Kaneko rubbed her right knuckle, watched it approach, and then sprang forward. She delivered a decisive strike that caused the priest's form to unravel into a shower of harmless sparks and dissipate, leaving only a scattering of light on the ground. As she stared at the fading remnants, she heard a splash and looked up to see a fish arc through the air and fall toward the bucket. Before she could move toward the bucket, something clamped around her foot. Looking down, she saw that the fallen priest's arm had latched on, refusing to let go. She tried to kick its grip free, but it held fast. She did not notice a figure approaching from behind until a hand grabbed the back of her head. The second priest had returned and restrained her. She frowned, raised a fist, and struck the priest, sending it tumbling away. The first priest on the ground began to reconstitute itself, its form knitting back together. Kaneko steadied herself, planted her free foot, and stomped down. The priest's form collapsed and flared into a burst of luminous ash that scattered harmlessly across the ground. She watched with cool interest as the remnants drifted away. The priest she had knocked down earlier picked itself up as well, its surface briefly distorting before smoothing out. It produced a gun and took aim. Kaneko tensed, sprinted forward, and struck it before it could fire. She followed with a sweeping forearm that sent the priest's shape apart in a bright flash. Its pieces dissolved into a puff of light. Wiping sweat from her brow, Kaneko turned back to the bucket and froze. Guarding it were 4 priests, all with swords raised and ready. She clicked her tongue and noted a stray branch on the ground. She picked it up and adjusted her grip into a comfortable stance. As she finished stretching, 4 more priests joined the original quartet, bringing the total to 8. She grimaced at being outnumbered. Up until now she had relied on her own strength, but she would have to use the unfamiliar power she had gained. Kaneko stepped forward and beckoned the priests to attack. 2 rushed at her with swords raised. She swung the branch with practiced force, bashing both and sending them backward while their weapons clattered free. By the time those 2 went down, the other 6 were already closing in. 4 of them charged head-on while 2 attempted to flank her. She knew she would come away with bruises and some scrapes, but the fish were calling to her in her mind, and she would not let them go uneaten. Fueled by that simple resolve, she braced herself for the next wave. Tabru asked if Kaneko was still trying to get to the 3 fish in the bucket. Issei said he thought she had given up an hour ago while chewing on a long blade of grass. Yumi laughed and cast her line. She and Asia had found and joined them some time back. Asia, looking concerned with a net in hand, said Kaneko should not strain herself. Asia then suggested to Tabru that using his ashes might catch the fish faster. The weapon shook his head and thought it would not taste as good. Tabru pulled back and sent another fish flying. Asia positioned herself, caught it, and gently dumped it into a nearby bucket. Kiba asked whether Tabru needed to eat. Tabru nodded and thought that he did not have to, but he wanted to, noting the difference between unnecessary and unwanted as he rolled his shoulders. They stayed quiet until Tabru rose and pulled his rod back one last time. Instead of a fish, a crab flew into the air and landed on his head. He did not seem bothered as he walked away with the fishing rod on his shoulder, picked up one of the filled buckets, and headed back toward the mansion. Issei followed, leaving his fishing rod behind and carrying 2 buckets. Soon only Kaneko remained. She finally managed to defeat the last of the priests in a swift, decisive exchange. Panting but victorious, she went to claim her prize. She lifted the bucket and dumped its contents onto the ground. She stared expressionless as 3 small fish struggled to reach the water. Wordlessly, she picked them up, paused, and threw them back into the pond. The fish flew through the air and splashed into the water. She kept her blank expression as she trudged back to the mansion, ash drifting past her. Her stomach growled and she frowned, briefly thinking about getting back at her senpai for making her fight for her meal. Her thoughts disappeared when she entered the clearing by the mansion and saw the Gremory peerage grilling the fish they had caught. She immediately joined them, forgetting her plans for revenge. Training, boosted gear. There was only a day left for training before the raiding game between Rias and Riser. The group assembled in a clearing, all wearing jerseys. Rias instructed Issei to use the boosted gear. He tilted his head, confused, recalling that he had been forbidden to use it while training there. Rias clarified that he had not been allowed to use it without her permission. She asked Kiba to partner with Issei. Kiba agreed and stood opposite him, warning that she would not go easy on him. Issei replied that neither would he and activated the boosted gear. His left arm glowed with green energy before the light faded to reveal his sacred gear. Rias told him to do it again. He nodded, clenched his fist, and the green jewel shone brightly as he activated boost once more. Aquino encouraged him that he could do better, which made him frown. He looked down at his sacred gear and moved it forward, engaging the boosted gear repeatedly until 12 power-ups accumulated. Aquino wondered aloud whether 12 power-ups was a record as she watched him with amusement. Rias then ordered him to stop, and he complied. Rias noted that he could now endure far longer than before and that the results of his training were clear. Issei faced Kiba as Rias instructed. He summoned his strength until a golden insignia appeared above the green jewel of his sacred gear, and a bright yellow aura surged upward, filling him with power. Rias directed him to fight Kiba in that state, and Kiba nodded. Rias leapt into the air with a wooden bakken in hand. Issei blocked her attack with the boosted gear and pushed her back. She landed on her knees and frowned. Rias ordered Issei to release all of his power onto Kiba. Issei gathered his energy into an armored hand and formed a small reddish orb. As Kiba sprinted toward him, he pet his arm back and struck the orb, sending it forward like a laser. Kiba reacted quickly and evaded the attack, and the beam struck a nearby mountain, triggering a spectacular explosion. When the dust settled, the mountain bore a long trench and a massive hole, the result of a powerful, focused impact. Everyone except Kaneko and Rias reacted with surprise. Then Issei's power abruptly reset and he dropped to his knees. Ash swirled beneath him and shaped itself into a chair, preventing him from collapsing to the ground, and Rias approached. Rias declared the match over and praised both fighters. Issei nodded sluggishly. Rias asked Yumi Kiba how the spar had gone. Yumi, slightly out of breath, reported that she had hoped to finish the fight in one blow but her bakken had snapped. She explained that despite trying to break through his defense, she had been unable to pierce it because his body had become too resilient. Had the battle continued, she would have been forced to withdraw after losing her weapon. Rias thanked Yumi and then turned to Issei. She pointed at the hole in the mountain and explained that with the boosted gear, he had the potential to reach the strength of a high-level devil. She told him that his body had passed the basic training and become a vessel capable of handling a sacred gear that dramatically increased his power. Even now, his body was growing stronger to accommodate that increase. Rias emphasized that with this sacred gear and continued improvement of his fundamentals, he could become one of the strongest beings alive, and that the scale of his power would depend on how much initial strength he built. Rias reminded him that the same applied to his speed and stamina. She told him he was a key player in tomorrow's game and that his strength would determine the outcome. She warned that if he fought alone it would leave his guard down while powering up and could be disastrous. Thankfully, it was a team battle and his comrades would support him. Her words drew a determined grin from him. Rias smiled at him and then turned to the rest of her peerage, who had been listening. She rallied them, insisting they would show those who looked down on them and that it did not matter whether their opponent was a phoenix. She vowed they would demonstrate the power of Rias Gremory and her servants. The peerage answered with a unified cheer.